Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Alright, so I've been sitting on this for a long time, and I guess now's as good a time as any to get it out. I've never really told this to anyone except my friend, and even then, we don't talk about it much because it just freaks us out. This happened when I was 19 years old, back in the late 70s. My buddy and I were both from Southern California. You know, sunny beaches and palm trees. So we thought we were tough shit heading up north to go bear hunting. We'd heard stories about Humboldt County, specifically the Hooper Indian Reservation, and how it was prime territory for black bears. We were young and dumb, full of that invincible feeling you get when you're that age. We drove up in my friend's dad's old 1949 Chevy pickup truck. That thing was a beast, but it had seen better days. The plan was simple: drive up, find a spot, set up camp, and hopefully bag a bear. We'd packed all the usual gear: tents, sleeping bags, a couple of rifles, and a .44 Magnum revolver that my friend's dad had lent us for protection. I remember the drive felt like it took forever. We left early in the morning, the sun just coming up, and the further north we went, the more the landscape changed. The cities faded away, and soon it was just forests and mountains, dense and dark in a way I'd never seen before. Back home, the forests were more like parks, but up here it felt ancient, like the trees had been there for thousands of years and didn't give a damn about us. We stopped in this little town, probably Willow Creek, though I can't be sure because it was so long ago. It was just a blink and you miss it kind of place, with a general store and a couple of gas stations. We needed directions, so we went into the store and asked this old man behind the counter where we might find some bear activity. He was Native American, I think, with a weathered face and eyes that looked like they'd seen a lot. He didn't say much, just kind of grunted and pointed vaguely up a mountain road. He told us, "You boys, be careful up there. It's not just bears you gotta worry about." At the time, I thought he was just messing with us, trying to scare a couple of city kids. But now, looking back, I wonder if he knew something we didn't. We took his directions and headed up this deserted mountain road. It was rough, mostly dirt and gravel, with potholes that jolted the truck so hard I thought my teeth would shake loose. The trees closed in around us, so thick that even in the middle of the day, it felt like twilight. We were driving for what felt like hours, and the higher we went, the colder it got. We started seeing patches of snow on the ground, which was weird because it was early fall, and we hadn't expected it. The air had that crisp, clean smell of pine and damp earth, but there was something else underneath it, something musky and wild that I couldn't place. Then, disaster struck. We hit a patch of snow that was deeper than it looked, and the truck's tires just spun out. We were stuck, good and proper. Panic set in for a minute because we were in the middle of nowhere, no cell phones back then, and if we couldn't get out, we were screwed. But we were determined not to turn back. We spent what felt like forever digging around the tires with our hands and a shovel we had in the back, laying down branches and whatever we could find for traction. My hands were numb from the cold, and I could feel the sweat cooling on my back, even though the air was freezing. Finally, after what must have been an hour of struggling, the truck lurched forward, and we were free. We both let out a huge sigh of relief, but the sun was starting to dip below the trees, and we knew we had to set up camp soon. We found a spot not too far from where we got stuck, under this massive pine tree that looked like it had been there since the beginning of time. Its branches spread out like a canopy, and the ground underneath was covered in a thick layer of bark and pine needles, so soft it almost felt like a carpet. We figured it would give us some shelter from the wind and any possible rain. Setting up the tent was a chore in the fading light. Our fingers were stiff with cold, and we fumbled with the poles and stakes. but eventually we got it pitched. We built a small fire, cooked some canned beans and hot dogs on a portable stove, and ate in silence, listening to the sounds of the forest around us. At first it was peaceful. The crackle of the fire, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But as it got darker, the sounds started to change. The forest got quieter, like everything was holding its breath. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was watching us. I brushed it off as nerves. We were in bear country after all. But the feeling wouldn't go away. We decided to turn in early because we were exhausted from the drive and the stuck truck ordeal. We zipped ourselves into the tent, lying side by side in our sleeping bags. The tent was small, barely big enough for the two of us, and every little sound seemed amplified. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears, and my friend's breathing was shallow and quick. We both had our rifles close by, and the .44 Magnum was within reach, just in case. That's when we heard it, a deep guttural grunt from outside, so low it vibrated through the ground. It wasn't like any bear sound I'd ever heard. Bears grunt, sure, but this was deeper, more resonant, like it came from something much bigger. My blood ran cold. I froze, barely daring to breathe, and I felt my friend go rigid beside me. We didn't say a word, just listened. Then came the crunch. At first, I thought it was an animal stepping on branches, but it was too heavy, too deliberate. It was the sound of bark and pine needles being crushed under something massive, and it was moving. Not the quick, light steps of a deer or the shuffling gait of a bear. This was something walking on 2 feet. I could hear the weight shift with each step. A slow, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch that circled our tent. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold, and my hands were trembling. I gripped my rifle tighter, but it felt useless. The footsteps kept circling, and then we heard breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, like whatever it was had been running or was just huge. It was so close I could almost feel the warmth of its breath through the tent fabric. The smell hit me then, that musky, wild odor I'd noticed earlier, but stronger now, like wet dog and earth and something else, something foul and primal. It made my stomach churn. We were both armed, but we were too scared to move. The thought of unzipping the tent and facing whatever was out there was terrifying. We whispered to each other, our voices shaky and low. "What the hell is that?" my friend said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. I didn't have an answer. We knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk on 2 feet for that long, and they don't sound like that. This thing was bipedal, and it was big, really big. After what felt like an eternity, we knew we had to do something. We couldn't just lie there and wait for it to tear through the tent. My friend suggested we scare it off with the gun. We decided to flip a coin to see who would go out first. I had a quarter in my pocket, and my hands were so sweaty I could barely hold it. We flipped it under the dim light of a flashlight, and my friend lost. I could see the panic in his eyes, but he nodded like he was steeling himself. Before he went out, we agreed to fire a few shots into the darkness to try and scare whatever it was away. I took the .44 Magnum, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I unzipped the tent flap just enough to stick the barrel out, and I fired 5 shots into the air, one after another. The sound was deafening in the silence, echoing through the trees. The flashes of light lit up the forest for a split second, but I didn't see anything, just shadows and trees. As soon as the shots rang out, the footsteps stopped. The breathing stopped. Everything went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, tense and waiting. We waited a few minutes, listening, but heard nothing. My friend took a deep breath and slowly unzipped the tent the rest of the way. He stepped out, his rifle held tight, and I followed, my own weapon ready. We shone our flashlights around, but the beams didn't reach far, and the darkness felt like a wall. We scanned the ground around the tent, but the thick layer of bark and pine needles made it impossible to see any tracks. There was nothing, no sign of whatever had been there. We stood there for a few minutes, our breath fogging in the cold air, our hearts still racing. The forest was silent, too silent, no owls, no rustling, nothing. It was like every living thing had fled or was hiding. We decided to get back in the tent, figuring whatever it was had been scared off. We zipped ourselves back in, but neither of us could relax. We just lay there, listening, waiting for something to happen. That's when we heard the scream. It came from about 100 yards away, deep in the trees. It was loud, piercing and high-pitched, but not like any animal I'd ever heard. It wasn't a coyote or a mountain lion. Those sounds I knew. This was different, almost human-like, but not quite, filled with rage or pain or something I can't even describe. It echoed through the forest, and then it cut off abruptly, leaving silence again. That scream chilled me to the bone. I felt a cold dread wash over me, and I knew we weren't alone out there. Whatever it was still nearby, and it wasn't happy. We didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made us jump, and we kept our weapons close. I must have drifted off at some point, but it was a fitful sleep, filled with nightmares of being chased by something huge and shadowy. When morning finally came, the sun filtering through the trees, it felt like a relief. We crawled out of the tent, stiff and exhausted, and immediately checked the area again. We looked for tracks, for any sign of what had been there, but the ground was still covered in that thick bark. And there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. It was like it had never happened, but we both knew it had. We packed up our camp as quickly as we could, not saying much. The drive back down the mountain was quiet. Both of us lost in our thoughts. We never did see a bear, and we never went back to that area. For years I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear acting strange, or some other animal we didn't know about. But deep down, I knew it was something else. It wasn't until years later, when I read about Sasquatch sightings and saw the Patterson-Gimlin film map, that it clicked. Our campsite was near where that famous footage was taken. That's when I realized we might have encountered one of those things. It changed everything for me. The way I see those remote forests, the way I think about what might be out there. But that day, all we had was the fear, the unknown, and that scream that still haunts me. I can't explain it, and I probably never will. Story 2. It was the 15th of November, a Friday. Me and 3 of my buddies from college had planned this camping trip for weeks. We tried to do it a couple times a year, just to get out of the city and disconnect. This spot we picked was about 5 miles north of Mariannville, Pennsylvania. It's not a formal campground or anything. It's just a patch of state forest land we've used before. It's pretty remote, which is the point. The only real landmark nearby is this old overgrown depression in the land that locals have used as an unofficial shooting range for years. You can sometimes hear the faint pop, pop, pop of gunfire during the day, but it's always quiet by evening. We got there in the afternoon and set up our 2 tents. The air was crisp, that kind of cold that feels clean in your lungs. The leaves were all down, so you could see pretty far into the woods, all grey trunks and tangled branches. We got a fire going early because the sun sets quick that time of year. As dusk started to settle in, that deep blue hour where everything loses its color, I realized we were a bit low on decent firewood. We had a bunch of twigs and smaller logs, but nothing that would last us through the cold night. I'd brought my chainsaw, a little battery-powered one, just for this purpose. It's not super loud, but in the quiet of the woods, it sounds like a monster. I remember the feeling of the handle, cold and solid in my hands. I put on my safety glasses, pulled the trigger, and that high-pitched whine just shattered the evening quiet. I was focused on cutting a decent-sized fallen oak limb into sections, the sawdust spraying out onto my boots, the smell of hot oil and freshly cut wood filling the air. I'd just finished a cut and let go of the trigger. The silence that rushed back in was absolute. My ears were ringing from the noise, and in that ringing quiet, We all heard it, a whoop. It wasn't like a yell or a scream. It was a vocalization, clear as a bell and loud, unbelievably loud. It sounded like it came from maybe 150 yards away, just beyond the first line of trees past our camp. It started low, rose to a high, powerful peak, and then trailed off. The whole thing lasted 4, maybe 5 seconds. It wasn't a screech, it wasn't a howl, it was a whoop, deep, resonant, and with a force behind it that felt like it hit you in the chest. All of us froze. I looked at my friends, and their faces were just blank masks of shock. One of them had been about to take a sip of beer, and his hand was just frozen in midair. The sound was almost human, but not quite. It was too powerful, too primal. There was a weight to it that a human voice couldn't have. My heart was suddenly hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure adrenaline. Without even thinking, I fumbled for the big maglite I keep next to the firewood pile. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I thumbed the switch, and a bright beam cut through the twilight, spearing into the woods where the sound had come from. I swept the light back and forth across the trees. The bare branches looked like skeletal fingers in the beam, and then I saw it. Movement, something big and dark detached itself from a high branch and took off in a silent, powerful flight. It was an owl, a big one, a barred owl, I think. It just flew away, ghost-like, into the deeper darkness. The tension just snapped. We all let out this collective, nervous breath. One of my buddies laughed, a short, sharp sound of relief. "Holy shit, it was just an owl," he said. "That was the freakiest owl call I've ever heard." Yeah, that's what we all agreed on. It had to be an owl. It made sense. The sound, the location, the fact that we saw an owl right there. We laughed about it, a bit too loudly, and I remember my hands were still tingling as I put the flashlight down. We spent the next hour or so joking about it, about how spooked we were, convincing ourselves it was just a weird animal noise. We're all rational guys. We believe in what we can see and explain. An owl was a perfect, logical explanation. The rest of the night was normal. We cooked dinner on the fire, we drank a few beers, we told stories. The normal sounds of the forest came back. The occasional hoot of an owl, a normal one this time, and later the distant yipping and howling of a coyote pack. It all sounded right. It fit. It was the soundtrack of the woods. But that one, whoop, it just didn't. It was an alien note in a familiar song. I went to bed around midnight, zipped into my sleeping bag in the tent with one of my buddies already snoring softly. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting a faint orange flicker on the tent walls. I fell asleep pretty quickly, the tiredness from the day and the fresh air pulling me under. Then I woke up instantly. Not a groggy, slow awakening, but a jolt, like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water on my soul. My eyes snapped open in the pitch black. The inside of the tent was utterly dark, the kind of dark you only get miles from any city lights. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I just lay there, frozen, listening to my own heart thudding in my ears. I looked at my watch, the digital numbers glowing a faint green. It was 3:30 in the morning. I hadn't heard a sound. Nothing had woken me up. But I was awake and I was filled with this feeling. It's hard to describe. It was a deep, instinctual certainty that something was out there, just outside the thin nylon wall of the tent. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical sensation, a pressure, a presence. My skin was crawling. Every hair on my arms and the back of my neck was standing straight up. I felt cold, a deep internal chill that had nothing to do with the November air. I held my breath, straining to hear anything over the sound of my own pulse whooshing in my ears. Nothing. The woods were dead silent. And that was wrong. The woods are never completely silent at night. There's always something. A rustle of leaves, the call of an insect, the scurry of a small animal. This was a thick, heavy, oppressive silence. It was the silence of something holding its breath. I lay there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes, just paralyzed by this primal fear. I was too scared to move, too scared to even nudge my friend awake. I didn't want to make a single sound. I felt like a rabbit that knows a fox is right outside its burrow. If I stayed perfectly still, maybe it wouldn't know I was here. My mind was racing, trying to latch onto a rational explanation. A bear? Maybe, but this felt different. A bear is an animal. This felt aware. I know how crazy that sounds, but the feeling was so intense, so specific. It was the feeling of being watched, not just glanced at, but studied, observed. Then, slowly, the normal night sounds started to trickle back in. First a single questioning hoot from far away, then a faint rustle in the leaves. The coyotes started up again, their howls sounding miles away. The spell was broken. The oppressive feeling of presence lifted, just faded away like a fog clearing. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake. I was drenched in a cold sweat. I didn't sleep another wink that night. I just lay there, staring into the darkness, waiting for the sun to come up. The morning was bright and cheerful, and the fear of the night felt stupid and distant. We packed up our gear, made some coffee, and headed home. We talked about the great time we had, and only briefly mentioned the weird owl from the night before. I didn't say anything about waking up at 3:30. It felt too irrational, too silly, but it stuck with me. That whoop, it nagged at me. A few weeks later, back at my lab, I was working on a project cataloging local wildlife vocalizations. I have access to a pretty extensive database of animal calls: owls, coyotes, foxes, you name it. On a whim, a little itch in the back of my brain, I decided to look it up. I pulled up the recordings of every owl species native to Pennsylvania: barred owl, great horned owl, screech owl. I listened to their calls, their hoots, their screeches. None of them matched. Not even close. The whoop we heard was lower, more guttural, and had a different cadence. It was structurally different. Okay, I thought. Maybe it was a coyote. Coyotes can make some bizarre sounds. I pulled up coyote vocalizations, the yips, the howls, the barks. Nothing. Their howls are long and drawn out, not a short, explosive whoop. I expanded my search. Bobcat? No. Fox? No. I even checked some rare or migratory birds that might pass through. Nothing. I spent hours cross-referencing, adjusting for acoustic distortion over distance, everything. I came up with a complete blank. There is no known animal in the woods of Pennsylvania that makes a sound like the one we heard. That's when the real unease set in. The campfire spookiness was gone. This was a cold, clinical dread. As a scientist, I rely on data. I find patterns. I identify things. I couldn't identify this. I still can't. My mind goes to the stories, the ones you hear whispered about, the ones I've always dismissed as folklore or hoaxes. But now I don't know. That feeling of being watched at 3:30 in the morning, it wasn't just fear, it was a recognition of something I didn't understand. I keep replaying that moment after the chainsaw stopped, the ringing silence, and then that sound tearing through it. The sheer power of it, the way it felt almost human, but was fundamentally, terrifyingly other. We were 5 miles north of Mariannville, near that old shooting range. We were just a bunch of guys camping. We heard a sound. We saw an owl fly away. We thought we had an explanation. We didn't. I don't know what was in those woods with us that night. I don't know what made that sound. I don't know what was standing outside my tent in the dead of night, so close I could feel its presence in my bones. And not knowing, that's the part that haunts me. That's the part I can't get past. I was there, I heard it, I felt it, and to this day I have no goddamn idea what it was. Story 3. I was home alone that night. My family was out of town visiting relatives, and I decided to stay behind because I had work stuff to catch up on. Plus, I'm not really into Halloween. Never have been. The whole trick-or-treating thing feels like a chore, so I figured I'd just keep the lights off and pretend no one was home. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind with big yards and lots of trees, so it's not unusual for kids to come by, but I just didn't feel like dealing with it. I'd stocked up on candy earlier in the week, but I hid it away in a cupboard, thinking I'd save it for myself or something. So there I was, sitting in the living room with all the lights off. It was around 7 o'clock, and it had been dark for a while. The sky was completely black, no moon or stars because of the clouds, and it felt kind of eerie, but I brushed it off. I had the TV on low, just some background noise, but I wasn't really watching it. I was scrolling through my phone, half paying attention to some memes when I first heard it. It started as a soft, shuffling sound outside, like something dragging through the leaves. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe a stray cat. We get raccoons and possums around here sometimes, so I didn't think much of it. But then it got louder, more deliberate. It wasn't random. It sounded like footsteps, but heavier, and there was a rhythm to it, like whatever it was moving with purpose. My heart started beating a little faster, but I told myself to chill out. It's Halloween, right? Probably some kids messing around, trying to scare people. I muted the TV and listened closer. The shuffling was coming from the side of the house, near the windows that face the backyard. We have those vertical blinds, the kind that click when you move them. And I remember feeling a knot in my stomach as I slowly got up from the couch. My legs felt shaky, like they weren't fully under my control. I crept over to the window, trying to be quiet, and I carefully pushed one of the blinds aside, just enough to peek out. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, standing maybe 10 feet away from the window, was this thing. I don't even know how to describe it properly, but I'll try. It was tall, really tall, like over 7 feet, I'd guess. And it had this dark, almost black fur that looked matted and thick. Its body was lean but powerful, with long arms that hung down almost to its knees, and it was standing on 2 legs, but it moved in a way that was both graceful and awkward, like it wasn't entirely comfortable upright. The head was what got me, though. It had a long snout, like a dog or a wolf, but longer and more pointed, with these ears that stood straight up, twitching slightly, and its eyes, oh God, its eyes. They were reflecting the tiny bit of light from the street lamp far away, glowing this pale yellowish color that made my skin crawl. It was peering into the window, not like it was just passing by, but like it was studying the house. Its head tilted slowly from side to side, and I could see its nostrils flare as if it was sniffing the air. I froze, completely paralyzed. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold sweat break out all over my body. I couldn't look away, even though every part of me was screaming to run. It took a step closer to the window, and I saw its hands. They were more like paws, but with long, bony fingers that ended in dark claws. It reached out and lightly brushed against the glass, not scratching it, just touching it, like it was testing the surface. My mind was racing. What the hell was this? A bear? No, bears don't stand like that, and they don't have snouts that long. A person in a costume? But it moved too fluidly, too naturally, and the fur looked real. Not like some cheap Halloween get-up. Plus, the way it was acting, it was too deliberate, too intelligent. It wasn't just roaming, it was checking the house, like it was looking for something or someone. I felt a wave of pure terror wash over me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my hands were trembling. I had to do something. I slowly backed away from the window, trying not to make a sound, but my foot bumped against the leg of the coffee table, and a book fell off with a soft thud. The creature's head snapped toward the noise, and those glowing eyes fixed on the window where I'd been peeking. I ducked down, crawling on the floor, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. I knew I had to get to the light switch. The thought kept repeating in my head, "Turn on the lights, turn on the lights." Maybe it would scare it away. I scrambled toward the wall, my knees scraping against the carpet, and I fumbled for the switch. My fingers were slippery with sweat, and I missed it the first time. I could hear the shuffling outside getting closer, like it was moving along the side of the house toward the front door. There was a low, guttural sound, not quite a growl, but something deeper, more resonant, that vibrated through the walls. Finally, my hand found the switch and I flipped it. The overhead light in the living room blazed on, and I immediately ran to the other rooms, flipping every switch I could find. The kitchen, the hallway, even the bathroom. The house was suddenly bright, too bright, and I stood there panting, my back against the wall, listening. The shuffling stopped. I crept back to the living room window, staying low, and peeked through the blinds again. The creature was still there, but it had backed away. It was now at the edge of the yard, near the tree line where the woods start. It was just standing there, watching the house. Its eyes were still glowing, but they seemed smaller, less intense in the light. It didn't look scared, just cautious, like it was reassessing the situation. I could see its chest moving as it breathed, and its head was cocked to the side, almost curious. I didn't know what to do. Should I call someone? The police? And say what? There's a big dog man in my yard. They'd think I was drunk or high. I thought about grabbing my phone, but I was too scared to move away from the window. I just stood there, frozen again, watching it watch me. The silence was deafening. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and my own ragged breathing. Then, after what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, a car turned onto our street. Its headlights swept across the yard, and for a split second, the creature was illuminated fully. I saw it clearly, the dark fur, the long limbs, the way it seemed to blend into the shadows. And then, as the headlights passed, it was gone. Just like that. It didn't run. It didn't make a sound. It just vanished into the trees, like it had never been there. I stayed by the window for a long time, staring at the spot where it had been. My whole body was shaking, and I felt nauseous. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang, and I almost jumped out of my skin. It was a group of kids in costumes, asking for candy. I forced myself to answer the door, my hands still trembling, and I handed out some candy from the stash I'd hidden. I tried to act normal, smiling and saying, "Happy Halloween," but my voice was shaky, and I kept glancing toward the tree line. The kids didn't seem to notice anything. They were just excited about the candy. After they left, I locked the door and checked all the windows. I didn't turn off the lights for the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with every light in the house blazing, staring at the windows, expecting to see those glowing eyes again. I didn't sleep at all. Every little noise made me jump. The creak of the house settling, the wind rustling the trees outside. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head, over and over. The way it moved, the intelligence in its eyes, the way it seemed to know I was there. To this day, I can't explain what it was. I've looked up stuff online, Bigfoot sightings, dogman stories, and some of it matches, but it doesn't make it any less terrifying. I've never seen it again, and part of me hopes I never do, but that night left a mark on me. I still get nervous when I'm home alone after dark, and I always keep the lights on now, just in case. Whatever that thing was, it felt ancient and knowing, like it was part of something bigger that I don't understand. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I think I hear shuffling outside, and my heart starts racing all over again. Story 4. The base was pretty standard. A bunch of low buildings, some barracks, a mess hall, and a command center, all fenced in with this tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Beyond that, it was just trees thick and dark like a wall of shadows. The air was cold that night, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, and I could see my breath fogging up in the beam of my flashlight. I had my M16 slung over my shoulder, the weight familiar and comforting, and my radio clipped to my belt. My job was simple: walk the fence line, check for any signs of tampering or intrusion, and report anything unusual. Usually it was nothing, maybe a deer or a raccoon scurrying around, but that night felt different from the start. I started at the east side of the perimeter, near where the forest crept closest to the fence. The ground was uneven, covered in patches of gravel and mud, and my boots crunched with every step. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the pine trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat, steady at first. But as I walked, I began to feel this odd tension building in my chest. I've been on patrols in worse conditions, rain, snow, you name it, but this was different. It was like the woods were watching me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. About an hour into my shift, maybe around 10 o'clock, I started hearing this low grunting sound. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a bear or something, but it didn't sound right. It was deeper, more guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. I stopped walking and listened, my hand tightening on my flashlight. The sound came from the tree line, about 50 yards away beyond the fence. I swung the light in that direction, but all I could see were trees and shadows. My heart started beating faster, and I felt a trickle of sweat run down my back, despite the cold. I told myself it was probably just my imagination, but the grunting kept up, steady and rhythmic, like it was communicating or something. I kept moving along the fence, trying to act normal, but my eyes were glued to the tree line. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I froze and pointed my flashlight directly at it. That's when I saw it. This huge, dark figure standing near the trees. It was tall, really tall, at least 8 feet, and covered in what looked like shaggy, blackish-brown hair. It was just standing there, partially hidden by the shadows, but I could make out its broad shoulders and long arms. Its head was massive, and for a second I thought it was a bear on its hind legs. But no bear moves like that. It was too upright, too human-like, but not human at all. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold dread wash over me. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. The thing turned its head slowly, and I swear it looked right at me. Its eyes, I don't know if they were glowing or if it was the reflection from my light, but they seemed to pierce through the darkness. Then it let out another grunt, louder this time, and it raised one of its arms and slammed it against a nearby tree trunk. The impact was so powerful that I felt the vibration through the ground, like a mini earthquake. It traveled up through my boots and into my legs, and a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I've felt vibrations from explosions before, but this was different. It was raw, primal, and it made my teeth rattle. I fumbled for my radio, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I keyed the mic and tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out all shaky. "Base, this is Patrol. I've got unknown movement at the east perimeter. Repeat, unknown movement." I described what I saw as best I could. A large bipedal figure 8 feet tall near the tree line, but it sounded insane even as I said it. The dispatcher on the other end asked for confirmation, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. But before I could say anything else, the thing let out this deep, rumbling roar and bolted into the forest. I've never seen anything move that fast. It was like a blur, crashing through the underbrush and disappearing into the trees in seconds. The sound of its movement was deafening, snapping branches and rustling leaves, and then, just like that, it was gone. I stood there for what felt like forever, my heart pounding in my ears. I could still feel the vibration in my feet, and my whole body was trembling. I radioed again, my voice cracking, and said it was gone, but I requested backup to check the area. Within minutes, a couple of other soldiers arrived in a jeep, their headlights cutting through the darkness. They asked me what happened, and I told them everything, but I could tell they didn't believe me. One of them joked that I'd had too much Halloween candy, but the other one, an older guy, just looked at the tree line with a serious expression. We searched the area with flashlights, but there was no sign of the thing. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing. The ground was too hard and rocky for clear footprints, and the forest was too dense to see far. But as we were wrapping up, one of the guys pointed out that a section of sandbags near the fence had been overturned. They were heavy, meant to reinforce the perimeter, and there was no way an animal could have done it without making a mess. Later that night, back at the barracks, I heard from others that the guard dogs were acting strange. They're usually fearless, but that night they refused to go near the east perimeter, whining and pulling back on their leashes. A few soldiers reported hearing odd noises or seeing shadows, but when we had a debriefing in the morning, no one admitted to seeing what I saw. The official report just said unexplained activity, and that was it. No follow-up, no investigation, just moved on like it never happened, but I couldn't move on. That image of the thing standing there, the sound of its grunt, the vibration from the tree, it stuck with me all these years. I've been in combat, faced real danger, but nothing ever scared me like that. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown, it was the feeling that I'd seen something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that defied everything I thought I knew. Every Halloween since then, I get this uneasy feeling, like the air itself is charged with something sinister. I don't talk about it much, because people either think I'm crazy or they make jokes, but I know what I saw. And to this day, I have no explanation for it. It's just there in the back of my mind, a memory that chills me to the bone whenever I think about it. Story 5. Okay, so I've never told this to anyone before, not even my family, because honestly, who would believe me? But I've been reading through some of the stories on here, and I figured maybe someone might get it. This happened to me about 5 years ago, back when I used to go hiking alone a lot. I was in my late 20s, fit, and thought I knew the woods like the back of my hand. I'd grown up in a rural area, spent tons of time outdoors, and nothing ever spooked me, not until that day. It was a Saturday in early October, and the weather was perfect. Cool enough that you needed a light jacket, but the sun was out, and the leaves were just starting to turn. I decided to head out to this spot I'd found a few weeks earlier, deep in the state forest, about an hour from my house. It wasn't a marked trail or anything, just a place I'd stumbled on while exploring. I liked it because it felt isolated, no people around, just nature. I packed my backpack with the usual stuff, water, some snacks, a first aid kit, and my camera. I'd gotten into photography lately, trying to capture wildlife shots. I left home around 8 in the morning, drove to the forest, and parked my car at this little pull-off area I always used. From there, it was about a 45-minute hike to where I wanted to set up. The walk-in was normal at first. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, and I could hear birds chirping, squirrels rustling in the underbrush. I remember feeling relaxed, my boots crunching on the dead leaves, the sun filtering through the trees. I even stopped to take a few pictures of some mushrooms and a deer I spotted in the distance. But as I got deeper in, maybe about halfway to my spot, things started to feel off. It's hard to explain, but the woods got quieter. Like unnaturally quiet. The birds stopped singing and the squirrels vanished. At first I brushed it off. Maybe a predator was around, like a coyote or something. I've seen that happen before, but then I started hearing these sounds. Not animal sounds exactly, more like something heavy moving through the brush, but slow, deliberate. I'd stop walking and it would stop too. I'd start again and it would pick up. My heart started beating a little faster, and I felt this prickle on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a bear or a moose. I'd seen both out here before, but this felt different. The sounds were too coordinated, like whatever it was keeping pace with me. I remember clutching my camera strap tighter and picking up my speed. My breathing got shallow, and I could feel sweat starting to dampen my shirt under my jacket, even though it was cool out. I finally reached my spot, this little clearing near a creek. I usually loved it there. The water sounded peaceful, and there was a big fallen log I'd sit on. But today, the creek seemed louder, almost masking other noises. I set my backpack down and tried to shake off the creeped out feeling. I told myself I was being paranoid. I took out my water bottle and drank some, my hands a little shaky. That's when I heard it again. A low, guttural sound, like a deep grunt coming from the trees across the creek. It wasn't a bear. I've heard bears, and this was deeper, more resonant. It vibrated in my chest. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I slowly turned my head toward the sound, but I couldn't see anything, just thick trees and shadows. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, and the smell changed. It went from fresh and earthy to something musky, almost like wet dog, but stronger with a hint of rot. My mouth went dry, and I had this urge to run, but my legs felt like jelly. I forced myself to stay calm, thinking if I moved slowly, whatever it was might lose interest. I decided to pack up and head back. No photos today. As I bent down to grab my backpack, I heard a branch snap loudly, like something big stepping on it. It came from the same direction as the grunt. I straightened up too fast, and my camera swung, hitting my leg. I didn't even care. All I could think was, I need to get out of here now. I slung my backpack on and started walking back the way I came, trying not to run because I didn't want to trigger a chase instinct if it was an animal. But the sounds followed me. That heavy, shuffling noise, always just out of sight. I'd glance over my shoulder and I'd catch movement in the periphery. Dark, tall shapes ducking behind trees. At one point, I swear I saw something massive and hairy standing between two pines, but when I looked directly, it was gone. My mind raced. Was it a person? No. Too big. A bear. But bears don't move like that, all upright and stealthy. I felt this cold dread seeping into me, and my hands were so clammy I could barely grip my backpack straps. The hike back felt twice as long. Every little noise made me jump. A leaf falling, the wind rustling branches. I kept my eyes darting around, my neck stiff from tension. I remember my throat was tight, and I had to keep swallowing to fight the panic. I started talking to myself under my breath, stupid stuff like, "You're okay, just keep moving." But it didn't help. The feeling of being watched intensified, like eyes were burning into my back. About 20 minutes into my retreat, I heard it again. That grunt, but closer this time, maybe only 50 feet away. It was followed by a series of quicker, huffing sounds, almost like it was communicating. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching. I could smell that musky odor stronger now, like it was right on me. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it. Not fully, but enough to make my blood run cold. Through a gap in the trees, I glimpsed something tall, way taller than a man, at least 7 or 8 feet. It was covered in dark, matted hair, and it was moving on 2 legs, but in a crouched, powerful way. It vanished behind a thicket before I could get a good look, but the image seared into my brain. My stomach churned, and I felt lightheaded. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk bipedal like that for long, and this thing was too lanky, too human-like in its posture. I thought of Bigfoot stories I'd heard, but I always dismissed them as nonsense. Now I wasn't so sure. I broke into a run. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just had to get to my car. My legs burned, and my lungs ached from the cold air and fear. I could hear it crashing through the brush behind me, keeping up easily. It wasn't running after me aggressively, more like it was herding me, or maybe just following out of curiosity. But the sounds were terrifying. Deep, rhythmic footfalls and occasional low growls that made the hair on my arms stand up. At one point, I tripped over a root and fell hard, scraping my hands and knees. The pain shot through me, but I scrambled up instantly, not even bothering to brush off the dirt. I glanced back and I saw it again, closer this time. It was standing partially behind a tree, and I could see its arm, long and muscular, covered in that dark hair. It didn't charge or anything, it just stood there watching me. Its eyes, I couldn't see them clearly, but I felt them, intense and intelligent. Not animal-like, but not human either. I let out a gasp and kept running, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The rest of the hike was a blur of panic. I didn't stop again, just pushed through the pain and fear. I could hear it following the whole way, sometimes falling back, sometimes getting closer. The smell lingered, that awful musk, and I started to feel nauseous. My mind was racing with thoughts. What if it catches me? What is it? Why is it here? I've never felt so vulnerable, so small. Finally, I burst out of the trees and saw my car in the distance. Relief flooded through me, but I didn't slow down. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice. I could still hear movement in the woods behind me, but it had stopped at the tree line. I didn't look back. I just yanked the car door open, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. I sat there for a minute, breathing heavily, my whole body trembling. I could see my reflection in the rearview mirror, pale, wide-eyed, with dirt smeared on my face. I started the car and peeled out of there, not caring about the gravel flying. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. I saw something move at the edge of the forest, a tall, dark shape just standing there, watching me leave. It didn't chase the car or anything, it just stood, and then it melted back into the trees. I drove straight home, not stopping for anything. When I got inside, I locked all the doors and windows and sat on my couch, shaking for what felt like hours. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise outside made me jump. I kept replaying it in my head, the sounds, the smells, that glimpse of something I can't explain. I never went back to that part of the forest again. I sold my camera not long after. I couldn't bear to look at the photos I didn't take that day. Sometimes I still smell that musky odor out of nowhere, and my heart starts racing. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. All I know is that day, something was out there with me, and it changed how I see the woods forever. I just can't shake the feeling that it's still out there waiting. Story 6. It was one of those perfect late September mornings, the kind that makes you forget winter is coming. The air was cool and clean, not cold, just fresh. My buddy and I had decided to get out of town for a few hours, hit the trails near Midburg. We'd been on this particular path a handful of times before. It's not the most popular one, which is why we liked it. You could usually walk for a couple of hours and not see another soul. We'd started just after 9 in the morning. The sun was filtering through the canopy, making everything look green and gold. We were just walking, talking about nothing important. Work, a game we'd watched, the usual stuff. The trail follows a creek for a good long while, and the sound of the water over the rocks is usually the only thing you hear besides your own footsteps and your own voice. It's peaceful, or it was. It happened around 11. We'd been walking for a couple hours, had just stopped for a minute to drink some water. We started walking again, and we were in a section where the trail bends slightly to the left, with the creek down a little bank to our right. The trees are a bit thicker there, lots of ferns and undergrowth. That's when we heard it. It wasn't a bird, it wasn't a squirrel. It was a crash, a real heavy, solid crash, like something big had just shoved its way through a bunch of dry branches. We both froze mid-step, just stopped dead. My heart, which had been beating nice and easy from the walk, just slammed into my ribs. My friend, he was a step ahead of me, and his head whipped around toward the sound, which came from up ahead and to the left. We stood there for maybe 2 seconds, just listening, not even breathing, and then it came out of the trees. It burst across the trail maybe 75 feet in front of us. I say burst, but that doesn't really cover it. It was a blur, a huge, black, fast-moving blur. My brain tried to process it, tried to put a name to it. Bear, moose, a guy in a dark coat. But it was moving too fast for any of those things to make sense. It came out of the woods on our left, hit the trail, and in what felt like less than a second, it had crossed the entire width of the path and the grassy ditch on the other side, and it was at the edge of the creek. The distance from where it entered the trail to the other side, we measured it later, was about 60 feet. It cleared it in seconds. I'm not talking about a run. I'm talking about a flat-out, powerful, ground-eating sprint. It was massive. That's the only word. It was just solid. It was covered in what looked like long, shaggy black hair, but it wasn't fluffy like a bear's coat. It was more like a thick, matted pelt. The shoulders were incredibly broad, way broader than any man's, and they tapered down to a narrower waist. Its arms were long, and they pumped as it ran, but the movement wasn't like a human's. It was more fluid, more powerful, like the muscles underneath were working on a different scale entirely. It was running on two legs. That's what made my stomach drop. It was upright. And then, as it hit the far side of the trail, just before it got to the creek bank, it turned its head. It didn't slow down, not even a little bit. Its body was still facing forward in a full sprint, but its head just swiveled on its shoulders and looked right back at us. We didn't see a face. Not eyes, not a nose, nothing. It was just a dark shape, a profile. But the intention was clear. It was looking at us. It knew we were there. The terror in that moment wasn't from seeing a monster. It was from seeing something that was so clearly, physically impossible and having it acknowledge our existence. It was the speed, the sheer size of it, and that turn of the head. It was a confirmation that we were seeing what we were seeing. Then, in one motion, it leapt. The bank of the creek there is about 5 feet high, straight up. It didn't scramble up it, it didn't climb, it just launched itself from the base, its legs propelling it upward, and it cleared the top of the bank like it was nothing. It vanished into the thick trees on the other side of the creek. The whole thing, from the crash to it disappearing, lasted maybe 3 seconds. 4 at the most. The woods went completely silent. The birds had stopped chirping. The insects had stopped buzzing. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. The only sound was the creek, which suddenly seemed way too loud. My friend and I just stood there. I could feel my legs shaking. I literally felt weak in the knees. I looked at him, and his face was white, pure white. His mouth was hanging open slightly. "Did you—" he started, but his voice was a dry croak. He didn't finish the sentence. I just nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, my heart was still hammering, and I could feel a cold sweat all over my body, even though I wasn't hot anymore. I felt cold, deep down cold. We didn't move for what felt like 5 minutes. We just stared at the spot where it had vanished. The trail was empty. The ferns on the other side were still swaying a little bit from its passage. That was the only evidence. "What the hell was that?" I finally managed to say. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "It wasn't a bear," my friend said, his voice a bit stronger now, but still shaky. "It ran on 2 legs, the whole way." We both knew that. We'd both seen it. Slowly, cautiously, we started walking forward. We weren't trying to follow it. God, no. It was more like we needed to get to the spot, to see the ground, to prove to ourselves that it had been real. Our steps were slow and careful. Every little sound, a leaf rustling, a twig snapping under our own feet, made us jump. We got to the place where it had crossed the trail. There were no clear footprints. The ground was dry and covered in leaves and pine needles. But you could see where something big had disturbed the leaves. There was a path of scuffed-up ground and broken ferns leading from the woods on the left, across the trail, and to the creek bank. We walked over to the creek bank. It was a straight-up dirt wall, like a small cliff, with tree roots sticking out of it. It was tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and the top of the bank was above my head. We looked at the base of the bank, and then at the top. There were no claw marks, no handholds dug into the dirt. Nothing. It had just jumped. My friend pointed to a tree right next to the trail, a young pine tree, about 8 feet up. There was a broken branch. The break was fresh, the wood underneath still pale and wet-looking. The branch was thick, maybe as thick as my thumb. "It hit that," he said quietly. I looked from the broken branch back to the trail. "When it came out of the woods," I said. He nodded. That's when the real dread set in. We were trying to piece it together, to understand the scale. My friend walked over and stood under the broken branch. He's about my height. The branch was a good 2 feet above his head, so its head was up here. he said, his hand hovering near the broken branch, when it was running. We just looked at each other. That meant it was huge, not just tall, but substantial. Its head was 8 feet off the ground, while it was in a full sprint. My brain kept trying to fit a person into that picture, but it didn't work. The fastest, tallest basketball player in the world couldn't move like that. The strength it would take to run that fast at that height, and then to leap up a 5-foot bank without breaking stride, it wasn't human. It wasn't any animal we knew. We decided to measure the distance it crossed. We didn't have a tape measure, so we counted our paces. My stride is about 3 feet. We walked from the edge of the woods, where it emerged, to the base of the creek bank. 20 of my paces, about 60 feet. We stood at one end and looked at the other. It was a long way, and it had covered it in a handful of seconds. The speed was just unnatural. The thought that kept going through my head was that it seemed startled. It crashed out of the woods because it heard us or smelled us. We surprised it, and its reaction wasn't to stop and look. Its reaction was to get away from us as fast as physically possible. That was the only thing that gave me a tiny, fragile sense of relief. It was afraid of us, or at least it wanted to avoid us. But then I'd remember the turn of the head. That wasn't the look of a frightened animal. That was a look of assessment. It was checking on us as it fled. We didn't stay much longer. The silence of the woods felt heavy now, oppressive. Every shadow between the trees felt like it was hiding something. We both felt like we were being watched. We turned around and started walking back the way we came, and we didn't stop. We didn't talk. We just walked fast, our heads on a swivel, looking into the trees on either side. The peaceful morning was gone. The forest felt alien and hostile. The hike back felt 10 times longer than the hike in. Every normal sound was terrifying. A squirrel chattering made my heart leap. The wind in the leaves sounded like footsteps. I kept glancing behind us, expecting to see that huge black shape following us, keeping pace just out of sight. I've never felt so exposed, so completely vulnerable in my entire life. We got back to the car, fumbled with the keys, and got inside. The second the doors were locked, we both let out a breath we didn't know we'd been holding. We just sat there for a minute, not saying anything, listening to the sound of the engine. On the drive home, we tried to talk about it rationally. Maybe it was a bear that was just running weird. Maybe it was a guy in a ghillie suit. But we both knew deep down that we were lying to ourselves. We'd seen it. We'd seen the way it moved, the sheer power and speed. We'd seen its size compared to that tree. A bear doesn't run that fast on 2 legs for 60 feet. A man doesn't leap a 5-foot creek bank without a running start. We looked up the trail online when we got home. We weren't the only ones. There were a few other accounts scattered on different forums of people seeing something big and dark and fast in that same general area. Reading those, my skin crawled. It was real. Other people had seen it too. We never went back to that trail. We haven't gone hiking together since. That was 2 years ago. Sometimes, if I'm in the woods for any reason, the memory comes back, and I get this prickling feeling on the back of my neck. I find myself scanning the tree line, listening for a crash that doesn't come. The image that's burned into my brain isn't a monster face. It's the silhouette, that solid, black, impossibly broad-shouldered figure, moving with a speed that defied physics, turning its head to look at us without breaking its terrifying stride. It's the feeling of being in the presence of something so much stronger and faster than you, something that belongs in those woods in a way you never will. It's the chill that runs down my spine when I remember that for 3 seconds, the world wasn't the place I thought it was, and I have no explanation for what I saw that day. None at all. Story 7. Okay, so this happened back in October 2011. My wife and I were camping near Julian, California. It's this little town out in the mountains, kind of in the middle of nowhere, but we loved it for the peace and quiet. We'd been there a couple times before, just to get away from the city noise, you know. This trip was supposed to be like the others. Some hiking, maybe a campfire and just relaxing. But that one day, man, it changed everything. I still get this tightness in my chest when I think about it. And I've never been able to shake the feeling that we weren't alone out there. It was early morning, maybe around 6 or 6:30, and the sun was just starting to come up. The air was cool and damp, with that fresh pine smell you only get in the woods. My wife had woken up before me and headed to the restroom. It was one of those pit toilets a few hundred feet from our campsite. I was still groggy, sitting on a log near our tent, just waiting for her to come back so we could start making breakfast. I remember rubbing my eyes and stretching, feeling the chill seep through my jacket. Everything was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own breathing, and it felt peaceful, you know, like the world was still asleep. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this sound from the north. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp and clear, cutting through the silence like a crack of thunder. It was a solid crack, like two pieces of wood hitting each other, not like a branch snapping, but more deliberate, like someone was banging a thick stick against a tree trunk. I froze right there, my hands going cold. I'd heard about tree knocks before, from stories online or whatever, but I never thought much of it. But this felt different. It was too clean, too intentional. I remember my heart starting to beat faster, and I stood up slowly, trying to peer into the trees. The woods were thick there, all shadows and tangled branches, and I couldn't see anything moving. Just that sound echoing in my head. And then nothing. Absolute silence. It was like the forest had swallowed the noise and was holding its breath. A few minutes later, my wife came back from the restroom, and I must have looked spooked because she asked me what was wrong. I told her about the knock, and she just shrugged it off, saying it was probably an animal or something, but I couldn't let it go. We started getting the camp stove ready for coffee, and I kept glancing toward the north, half expecting to hear it again. The silence was getting to me. It was too heavy, you know, like the air was thick with something I couldn't name. Then, maybe 20 minutes after that first knock, we heard another sound, this time from the east. It was a deep whoop, low and guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a bird or a coyote. I've spent enough time outdoors to know what those sound like. This was deeper, almost human-like, but not quite, with a resonance that made the hairs on my arms stand up. As soon as it happened, the blue jays in the trees nearby went absolutely crazy. They started screeching and flapping around like they'd been startled out of their minds. The chaos was sudden and loud, and it made me jump. My wife grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve, and we just stared at each other. Her eyes were wide, and I could feel my own pulse thumping in my throat. We stood there for what felt like forever, listening as the birds settled down, but the woods went quiet again, too quiet. It was eerie, like everything was waiting for something else to happen. I remember the smell of damp earth and pine needles, and the way the light was filtering through the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. My skin was crawling, and I had this urge to pack up and leave right then. But we'd just gotten there the day before, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. A little while later, our friend showed up. He was camping at a site not too far away, and we planned to meet up for a hike. When he arrived, I told him about the sounds, and he laughed it off at first. But then, as we were talking, we heard another knock, this time from the west. It was the same solid crack, wood on wood, and it was closer than the first one. My friend's face went pale, and he nodded slowly. "Yeah, I heard that too," he said, his voice low. "That's not normal." Hearing him confirm it made my stomach drop. It wasn't just in my head. This was real. From there, things just got weirder. Over the next couple of hours, we heard more whoops coming from different directions, north, south, east, like they were surrounding us. Each one was deep and echoing, and they'd happen one after another with pauses in between. It felt coordinated, like someone or something was signaling to others. The sounds didn't overlap. It was almost rhythmic. Whoop from the left, silence, then whoop from the right. And every time the woods would go dead silent afterward, like the animals were hiding or scared. I remember the chill that ran down my spine, and I kept clenching my fists, my palms sweaty. My wife was gripping my hand the whole time, and I could feel her trembling. Our friend kept shaking his head, muttering about how this wasn't right. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was hunters or kids playing a prank. But we were deep in the woods, miles from any roads, and it was early on a weekday. Who would be out here making sounds like that? And the coordination. It was too precise. It didn't match any animal calls I knew, and it sure as hell wasn't human. I've heard people yell or whistle in the woods, but this was different. It had a primal quality to it, something ancient and wild. The silence between the sounds was the worst part. It amplified everything, making every little noise, a leaf rustling, a twig snapping, feel like a threat. I remember the way the light changed as the morning wore on, the sun getting higher but not warming me up because I was so cold with fear. My muscles were tense, and I kept scanning the trees, expecting to see something move. But there was nothing. No shadows, no figures, just empty forest. That made it even scarier, knowing something was out there but not being able to see it. It was like being watched by invisible eyes. And I could feel this pressure building in my chest, like I couldn't breathe properly. At one point, we decided to stay close to the campsite and not go on the hike we'd planned. We just sat around the fire pit, not talking much, just listening. Every time a sound came, we'd freeze and look at each other, and I'd see the same fear in their eyes. My friend pulled out his phone at one point, like he was going to record it, but the sounds were too sporadic, and he gave up. I remember the frustration mixing with the fear. Why couldn't we see anything? Why was this happening? The whoops and knocks kept up intermittently for what felt like hours, but in reality it might have been less. Time got weird, you know. It dragged on, but also felt like it was flying by. I kept checking my watch, but the numbers didn't mean much. All I could think about was getting out of there. My wife suggested we pack up early, and I agreed, but we didn't want to move around too much in case we attracted attention. So we just waited, huddled together, feeling exposed. I remember the physical sensations so clearly, the cold sweat on my back, the way my heart would race every time a sound echoed through the trees, the tightness in my jaw from clenching it. My legs felt weak, like I'd been running, and I had to keep shifting my weight to stop them from shaking. The air smelled of campfire smoke from the night before, but it was faint, and the earthy scent of the forest was overpowering. Every time a breeze rustled the leaves, I'd jump, thinking it was another whoop. As the afternoon rolled around, the sounds started to taper off. They became less frequent, farther away, like whatever was making them was moving on. But the silence that followed was just as unsettling. It was like the forest was holding its breath again, waiting for us to leave. We finally started packing up our gear, working quickly and quietly, not saying much. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something staring back at me from the trees. But there was nothing, just empty woods. We left the campsite around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, driving out on the dirt road that led back to the highway. The whole way, I kept looking in the rearview mirror like I was being followed. My wife was quiet, just staring out the window, and our friend followed us in his car. When we got to a gas station in Julian, we all got out and just stood there for a minute, not knowing what to say. Finally, my friend said, "I've never heard anything like that before." And that was it. We didn't talk about it much after that, but I could tell it had shaken him too. The rest of the trip was ruined, honestly. We ended up cutting it short and heading home a day early. I couldn't sleep properly for weeks afterward, and every time I heard a noise outside at night, I'd tense up. I've tried to research it since then, reading online forums and stories from other people who've had similar experiences. A lot of them talk about Bigfoot, and the sounds match. Tree knocks, whoops, that kind of thing. But I don't know what to believe. Part of me wants to think it was just some weird natural phenomenon or people messing around, but deep down, I know it wasn't. The coordination, the silence, the way it felt like we were being surrounded, it was too real, and that's the thing. I never saw anything, no big footprints, no shadows, no creatures, just the sounds. But that was enough to leave me on edge, and to this day, I can't go camping without getting that same chill. It's like that day left a mark on me, and I don't think I'll ever fully understand what happened out there in the woods near Julian. Story 8. It was one of those late summer evenings where the air starts to get that little bit of a chill, the kind that reminds you fall isn't too far off. I'd been cooped up in the house all day working on some reports for my job, the kind of stuff that makes your brain feel like mush, and I just needed to get out. My place in Illinois backs up against a pretty decent stretch of woods, with a network of old bike trails crisscrossing through them. Nothing too wild, but enough to feel like you're away from everything for a little while. I decided to go for a walk, just to clear my head before it got fully dark. I figured I had maybe an hour of decent light left. I threw on a hoodie, stuck my keys and my phone in my pocket, and headed out the back gate. The trailhead is maybe 100 yards from my property line. I've walked these trails 1,000 times. I know where the big oak tree with the split trunk is. I know the spot where the blackberries get thick in July. I know the little dip in the path that always collects a puddle after it rains. It's my normal. That evening, everything was normal. The crickets were starting up, and the light was that deep golden color that makes everything look soft. I was just walking, not really thinking about anything, just breathing in the damp, earthy smell of the woods. My mind was still half on those spreadsheets, if I'm being honest. Then I heard it. At first, I didn't even really process it. It was a sound that didn't belong, but my brain tried to file it under something familiar. It sounded like a weed eater, you know, that high-pitched two-stroke engine whine. It was coming from off to my left, deeper in the woods, maybe 50, 60 yards in. I remember stopping on the path, listening. It was weird. Who the hell would be weed-whacking in the woods at dusk? There aren't any houses back there, just more trees, and then eventually state land. And it wasn't like a constant sound. It would rev up, then die down to a lower grumble, then rev up again. It had a weird, almost mechanical rhythm to it, but there was something else underneath it, something I couldn't place. Curiosity got the better of me. It always does. I left the path and started picking my way through the undergrowth. It wasn't easy going. The ground was uneven, covered in a thick layer of last year's leaves, and there were thorny vines snagging at my jeans. The sound was getting louder, and that's when the first little prickle of unease went down my spine. It didn't sound right. Up close, it was less like a tool and more like, I don't know, a distorted voice trying to mimic a machine. There was a buzzing, grating quality to it that set my teeth on edge. It was loud, too. Really loud. I moved slower, trying to be quiet without really knowing why. My heart was starting to beat a little faster, a dull thump in my chest. I crept up behind a thick cluster of young birch trees, using them as a screen to peer through. And that's when I saw it. My brain just short-circuited. It couldn't make sense of what my eyes were seeing. There was a figure, maybe 30 yards away, sitting on the ground with its back to me. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing, even sitting down, looked massive. It was slumped forward, and its shoulders were incredibly broad, covered in what looked like dark brown, almost blackish hair that was matted and shaggy. The sound was coming from it. This thing was making that horrible mechanical weed whacker sound. It was rocking back and forth just slightly, and the sound would change pitch with the movement. I just stood there frozen, my hand gripping a birch sapling so hard the bark was digging into my palm. I remember my mouth had gone completely dry. This wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. This was bipedal. It had the shape of a person, but a giant, powerfully built person. The sheer size of it was overwhelming. I felt small, insignificant, like a mouse that had just stumbled into a lion's den. I must have stood there for a full minute just watching it, listening to that awful sound. Part of me was screaming to turn around and run, but a bigger, stupider part was just locked in place by a kind of horrified fascination. I needed to see its face. I needed some kind of confirmation, some detail that would make my brain click and go, oh, it's just a guy in a suit or something, anything rational. I took a half step to the side, trying to get a different angle, and my foot came down on a dead branch. It wasn't even a loud snap. It was more of a dull crack. But in the quiet of the woods, with that horrible droning sound as the only other noise, it might as well have been a gunshot. The sound stopped instantly. The rocking stopped. The thing went completely still. It was so sudden, the silence felt heavier and more menacing than the noise had been. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I stopped breathing. Then it moved. It didn't turn around. It didn't look at me. It just stood up. It unfolded itself from the ground with a speed and fluidity that was terrifying for something so big. There was no grunt of effort, no rustle of movement. It just went from a sitting position to fully upright in one smooth, powerful motion. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. The legs were thick as tree trunks, and its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. As it stood, its left hand swept down and scooped something up from the ground near its feet. My eyes, wide with panic, registered what it was. It was one of my cantaloupes. I have a small vegetable garden near the edge of my property, and the critters are always getting into it. I'd noticed one was missing a couple days before and figured it was a raccoon. This thing had my cantaloupe. It cradled the cantaloupe in one huge hand, holding it tight against its chest. And that's when I saw, with a clarity that haunts me, that it was female. The shape of its body was unmistakable. It had large, pendulous breasts hanging on its chest, covered in the same dark, coarse hair. The reality of what I was looking at hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some abstract monster. This was a living, breathing animal. A female one. The fear that washed over me then was different from anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just the fear of being hurt. It was a deep, primal, gut-level terror. It was the fear a prey animal feels when it knows it's been seen by a predator. My whole body was screaming at me to run, but every muscle was locked up. I was shivering, but not from the cold. It was a full-body tremble, like my nerves were all firing at once. It still hadn't looked at me. Its head was tilted down, looking at the cantaloupe in its hand. I could see the powerful line of its jaw, the heavy brow ridge. But not its eyes. It just stood there, completely motionless, holding my stolen melon. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no birds, nothing. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath with me. Then it took a step, then another. It didn't run. It just walked, with a strange, purposeful grace, away from me and into the deeper, darker part of the woods. Its feet made almost no sound on the forest floor. It moved between the trees, and within seconds, the shadows just swallowed it up. It was gone. I didn't move for what felt like a long time. I just stood there, shaking, my ears straining for any sound. There was nothing. The normal night sounds started to slowly trickle back in, but they sounded far away, like I was hearing them from underwater. The need to leave, to get out of there, became an overwhelming physical urge. It wasn't a thought. It was an instinct. I didn't turn my back on the spot where it had disappeared. I started backing away, step by slow, careful step. My eyes were fixed on the trees, expecting it to come bursting back out at any second. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every rustle of a leaf made me jump. I backed up until I bumped into a tree, and the shock of it almost made me scream. I finally turned around then and started walking, faster and faster, back the way I came. I didn't run. Something in my head told me not to run. That running might trigger a chase response. I just power walked, my heart hammering against my ribs, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I didn't feel the thorns tearing at my clothes. I didn't feel the branches whipping my face. All I felt was the burning need to be back on the path, back to my gate, back inside my house, with the doors locked. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw the gravel of the bike path, it was like surfacing from a nightmare. I didn't stop. I practically ran down the path, my footsteps crunching way too loud in the quiet evening. I fumbled with the latch on my gate, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get it open. I slammed it shut behind me and ran to my back door, scrambling to get my keys out of my pocket. I got inside, locked the door, and then went through the whole house, checking every window and door, making sure everything was locked tight. I sat on my couch in the dark for hours, just listening. I couldn't think. I couldn't process it. I just replayed those few minutes over and over in my head. The sound, the way it stood up, the cantaloupe, the breasts, the way it just vanished. I never went back to that part of the woods. I still walk the trail sometimes, but only in the bright light of midday, and I never ever step off the path. I don't tell people about it. Who would believe me? I can hardly believe it myself, but I know what I saw. That image is seared into my memory. Every detail, every sensation, the chill in the air, the smell of the damp leaves, the feeling of the birch bark in my hand, the complete and utter silence after the sound stopped, and the sheer, overwhelming size of it. It was real. It was there, and sometimes, when the wind is just right, or when I hear a distant engine that sounds a little off, I feel that same cold fear wash over me all over again, and I have to fight the urge to go lock all my doors. I never found any tracks. I never heard the sound again. It was just that one evening, that one encounter, and then nothing. But it was enough. It was more than enough. Story 9. The night was cool, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones even through a thick jacket. A low mist was hanging over the lake and creeping into the tree line, making the beams from our halogen light stands look like solid pillars cutting through the gloom. It was quiet, too quiet. Normally, you get the background hum of the forest, even at night. Crickets, the occasional owl, the rustle of something small in the underbrush. But that night, it was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over everything. We'd all noticed it, but nobody said anything. You don't, on a crew like that. You just keep your head down and work. It was just after 2 in the morning. I remember because I'd just checked my watch, thinking we had about 4 hours of darkness left to get this section laid down. I was sitting in the paver's cab, the engine rumbling beneath me, the heat from it blowing stale air on my legs. I had the door cracked open to let in some of the cold air, just to stay awake. That's when I first smelled it. It wasn't a gradual thing. One moment the air was clean, cold, with a hint of pine and wet earth. The next, it was like a wall of smell hit me, a heavy, musky odor, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something rotten, mixed with the deep, dank smell of a swamp. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I coughed and looked over at Dave, the laborer who was raking asphalt near the front of the paver. He had stopped what he was doing and was staring into the trees, his nose wrinkled up. "You smell that?" he called out, his voice sounding small in the huge silence. Before I could answer, the first crack came from the forest. It wasn't a small snap. It was a loud, sharp report, like a thick branch being broken over someone's knee, then another, closer this time, and another. It was a series of them, methodical, like something big was just walking through the woods and didn't care what it broke. My first thought was a bear, a big one, but the smell was wrong, and the sounds. They were too deliberate. A bear blunders through. This sounded like it was making a point. Instinct took over. I killed the engine of the paver. The sudden silence was deafening, worse than the noise had been. The only sound now was the gentle tick-tick-tick of the hot paver cooling down and our own ragged breathing. All 4 of us were frozen, staring into that wall of black trees. The halogen lights only reached maybe 30 feet in, and beyond that was just absolute darkness. That's when we saw it move. It was deep in the shadows at first, just a shift in the darkness that was blacker than the rest. Then it stepped into the edge of the light. My brain short-circuited. It was standing upright on two legs, but it was taller than any man I've ever seen. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 1.5 feet taller, maybe more. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, sloping down to long, thick arms that hung past its knees. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear. It was dark, almost black, and looked matted and wet in the mist. It stopped at the tree line, just standing there looking at us. I couldn't see its eyes clearly, just dark pits in its face, but I could feel it looking at me. It was a physical pressure, a weight on my chest. Then it made a sound. It started low in its chest, a deep, guttural rumble that I felt in my teeth. And then it erupted into this whoop. It's the only word for it. A deep, powerful woo up that echoed across the surface of the lake and bounced back at us from the hills. It wasn't a scream. It was a declaration. The sound vibrated through the soles of my boots. Dave, who was closest to the trees, took a stumbling step backward, his rake clattering on the fresh asphalt. The moment he moved, the creature moved. It didn't run at him. It turned slightly, took one of those long arms, and slapped the trunk of a cedar tree right next to it. The sound was not of this world. It was a gunshot, a sharp, concussive crack that made all of us flinch. I saw pieces of bark explode from the trunk. The tree, which was a good foot in diameter, shuddered from the impact. My heart wasn't just beating fast anymore. It was trying to punch its way out of my ribcage. I could feel the blood roaring in my ears. This wasn't a curious animal. This was aggression, pure, simple, and terrifying. It took a step forward, out of the trees and onto the gravel shoulder of the road. It was even bigger out in the open. It moved with a heavy, powerful grace, not clumsy at all. Its feet were huge. It stopped maybe 50 feet from us, standing between our paver and the dump truck. It looked down at the ground, at a chunk of old, broken asphalt that had been dug up during the prep work. It bent down, Christ, the sheer size of it when it moved, and picked up the chunk like it was a pebble. It was the size of a cinder block. It straightened up, its eyes, those dark pits, fixed on our paver, on me. It threw it. There was no wind-up, no baseball pitch. It was just a casual, powerful flick of its wrist. The chunk of asphalt sailed through the air and landed with a heavy, dull thud, maybe 10 feet from the paver's tracks. Gravel and dust sprayed up. It was a warning shot, a damn accurate one. Then it started stomping, lifting one of those huge feet and bringing it down on the gravel. Thump, then the other. Thump. At the same time, it started slapping its hands together. Not a clap, but a hard, meaty smack, palm against palm. The stomping and the slapping together created this primitive, rhythmic beat of intimidation. It was showing us it wasn't afraid. It was telling us to leave. That broke the spell. We didn't need to say a word to each other. We all moved at once. I scrambled out of the paver's cab, my boots slipping on the metal steps. I didn't look back. I just ran for my pickup truck, which was parked behind the roller. Dave was already ahead of me, fumbling with the door handle of the dump truck. I heard the other guy, Steve, in the roller, his engine coughing to life, and then dying again in his panic. I yanked my truck door open and practically fell inside, slamming the door shut and hitting the lock button. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, and I flipped on the headlights, aiming them toward the thing. It was still there, pacing. It had stopped the stomping and slapping, and now it was just walking back and forth along the edge of the road, just outside the circle of our halogen lights. It was moving parallel to us, its head tilted, watching our vehicles. It was herding us. It knew exactly what it was doing. I could see it more clearly in my headlights. The hair on its arms and shoulders was thick and coarse. Its chest was massive. As it paced, it would occasionally reach out and snap a branch off a tree, the sound like a rifle shot in the tense air. It wasn't doing it for a path. It was just breaking them, showing us how easy it was. The musky smell had filled my truck cab. I hadn't even rolled the window down, but it was in here with me, that thick, foul odor of wet fur and decay. It was suffocating. Then it stopped pacing and looked directly at my truck. It bent down, picked up a rock the size of my fist and threw it. Not at my truck, thank God, but at one of the halogen light stands. It hit the metal pole with a loud clang, and the light flickered violently, throwing crazy jumping shadows everywhere for a second. We were all just sitting there, trapped in our metal boxes, engines running, watching this 8-foot-tall nightmare decide our fate. The minutes stretched on. It felt like an hour. It just kept circling, a predator evaluating its prey. I kept thinking, the windows won't stop it, the doors won't stop it. If it wants to, it can just peel the roof off this truck like a can of sardines. I had a lump in my throat so big I couldn't swallow. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I was sweating despite the cold, a cold, clammy sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. It stopped its pacing and turned to face the forest. It stood there for a long moment, its back to us, and let out one last, long whoop. This one sounded different, less aggressive, more final, a sound of dismissal. Then it just walked back into the trees. It didn't run. It didn't look back. It just melted into the darkness. And a few seconds later, we heard the cracks and snaps of its passage moving away, up the slope, getting fainter and fainter until there was nothing. The silence rushed back in. The musky smell started to slowly fade, replaced by the cold night air. None of us moved for a long time. I don't know how long we sat there just listening, waiting for it to come back. Finally, Dave got out of the dump truck, his face pale in the headlights. He walked over to where the thing had been standing, and I saw him shine his flashlight on the ground. He looked back at me, his eyes wide, and just shook his head. We all got out then, moving in a tight, nervous group. We didn't speak, we just looked. In the soft gravel of the shoulder there were footprints. They were huge. I put my boot next to one. My size 11 work boot looked like a child's shoe. These things had to be at least 18 inches long and wide. The impressions were deep, like whatever made them weighed a ton. And there were broken sticks everywhere, scattered around like it had been marking its territory. We looked at each other. No one said Sasquatch. No one said Bigfoot. We didn't have to. We all knew in that moment that every story, every legend, every blurry video, there was something to it. And we had just been on the receiving end of its anger. We didn't say another word. We just got in our vehicles. We left the paver, the roller, the dump truck, the lights, everything. We just drove away, back toward town. We didn't even call the boss. We just drove. The next day, in the daylight, we went back with a couple more guys to retrieve the equipment. The footprints were still there. We took pictures, but they just looked like blobs in the gravel. You had to have been there to understand the scale. The chunk of asphalt was still lying where it had thrown it. The scar on the cedar tree was fresh and raw. We finished that job, but we insisted on day shifts only, and never with less than 6 guys on site. I still work paving, but I won't take overnight jobs in deep forest areas anymore. Not after that. People ask me what I think it was. I tell them I don't know. But I know what it did. I know how it moved. I know the intelligence in its actions. It wasn't just a wild animal, it was something else, and the feeling of sheer primal terror it instilled in me, the memory of that whoop echoing over the lake, and the sight of it standing there, letting us know in no uncertain terms that we were the intruders. That's something that stays with you. I can still smell that musky stench sometimes when the wind blows a certain way through the trees, and my heart just stops. Story 10. Okay, so this happened just a few days ago, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I've been sitting here for hours, typing and deleting, because how do you even start explaining something like this without sounding like you've lost your mind? But I need to get it out, and maybe someone here will believe me, because nobody else does. It was mid-October, around sunrise. I remember because I'd woken up early, like I always do this time of year, to check on the pumpkin field before the day really got going. The air had that crisp, cold bite to it that makes your breath fog up, and the sky was just starting to lighten from black to a deep, dusty blue. No stars left, but the sun wasn't fully up yet. Just a faint orange glow on the horizon behind the trees. I've got this big patch of land out back, about an acre or so, filled with pumpkins I've been growing for years. It's my side thing, you know, something to keep me busy after my day job. That morning, I pulled on my old boots and a thick jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out. The grass was wet with dew, and every step made a soft squelching sound under my feet. The field is set on a slight slope, so from the edge, you can see most of it spread out. Pumpkins everywhere, some big as basketballs, others smaller and still greenish. I was walking along the rows, just checking for any signs of rot or animals getting into them. We've had issues with deer and raccoons before, but nothing too serious. As I moved deeper in, maybe about 50 feet from the tree line, I stopped to look at one of the bigger pumpkins. It had a weird discoloration I wanted to check later. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, though they're usually shy. But this wasn't a bear. It was tall, really tall, like 7 feet or more, and covered in dark brown hair that looked matted and thick, almost like fur. It was standing in the center of the patch, maybe 30 yards away from me, and it was holding one of my pumpkins. Not just holding it, carrying it like it was nothing. This pumpkin was huge, one of the ones I'd been proud of, probably weighing 20 pounds or more. And this thing had it cradled in one arm like it was a softball. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I froze right where I was. My flashlight still pointed ahead, but my hand was shaking so bad the beam wavered all over the place. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. The thing was moving, not fast, but steady, heading from the center of the field toward the edge where the brush starts. Its arms swung in a weird, heavy way, and its head was kind of low, like it was trying to stay hidden or something. It didn't see me at first, I don't think, because it was focused on getting to the trees. I stood there watching it, and my mind was racing. What the hell is that? Is it a person in a costume? But no, the way it moved was too fluid, too natural. It didn't walk like a human, more like a gorilla or something, but upright. Its legs were thick, and it took long strides, but quietly, like it wasn't making much noise despite its size. The pumpkin in its arm didn't seem to bother it at all. It just held it tight against its body. Then, as it got closer to the tree line, it must have sensed me or heard something, because it paused and turned its head slightly. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was too dark, and the hair covered most of it, but I got this feeling, this deep, primal fear that shot through me. My skin went cold, and I felt this tightness in my chest, like someone was squeezing my lungs. I remember thinking, if it charges, I'm dead. There's no way I can outrun that. But it didn't charge. It just stared in my direction for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it turned back and kept walking, disappearing into the brush. The moment it was gone, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, and my legs felt like jelly. I stayed there, rooted to the spot, for I don't know how long. The sun was starting to come up properly now, casting long shadows, and the field was quiet again, but it felt different, wrong. After a minute or two, I forced myself to move. My hands were still trembling, and I fumbled with my flashlight, almost dropping it. I walked slowly toward where it had been, my heart pounding in my ears. The ground was soft from recent rains, so I expected to see footprints. But when I got there, I couldn't find any clear ones. There were impressions in the mud, kind of smeared and messy, like something heavy had been there, but no distinct tracks. Nothing like bear paws or human boots, just disturbed earth. I looked at the spot where it had picked up the pumpkin. The vine was torn, not cut, and there were scratches on the stem, deep grooves that looked like they were made by claws or something sharp. My mind went back to the thing I saw, and I felt that fear again, fresh and raw. I started checking other pumpkins nearby, and that's when I noticed more scratches. Not on all of them, but on a few, like something had been testing them, or maybe just brushing against them. The scratches were irregular, some shallow, some deep, and they didn't look like animal marks. Deer or raccoons usually nibble or gnaw, but these were like gashes. I spent the next hour or so walking the perimeter, my eyes darting toward the trees every few seconds. Every little sound, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, made me jump. The sun was fully up now, warming the air, but I still felt cold inside. I kept replaying what I saw in my head, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? But bears don't walk upright like that for long, and they don't carry pumpkins that way. And the height. It was too tall for any bear I've ever seen around here. Plus the hair was different, longer and more uniform, almost like a coat. I decided to head back to the house, my mind racing. I needed to tell someone, but who? My neighbors are good people, but they're practical, you know? They'd laugh it off. Still, I had to try. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water with shaking hands, and called my neighbor, Dave. He lives about half a mile down the road, and we help each other out sometimes. When I told him what I saw, he did exactly what I expected. He laughed. "Come on, man," he said. "You sure it wasn't just a big old bear? Or maybe you were still half asleep?" I tried to explain, to describe the height, the way it moved, but he just brushed it off. Probably a prank or something, kids messing around. But it wasn't kids. No kid could be that tall or move like that. And why would they be in my field at sunrise carrying a pumpkin? After that call, I felt even more alone. I went back outside later that day, around noon, to take another look. The field seemed normal, peaceful even, with the pumpkins glowing orange in the sunlight. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I walked over to the brush where it had disappeared, and that's when I saw the crushed leaves and broken branches. Something big had pushed through there, no doubt about it. The vegetation was flattened in a path, about 3 feet wide, leading into the woods. I followed it a little ways, but my courage ran out pretty quick. The woods are dense here, full of oaks and pines, and it gets dark even during the day. I didn't want to go too far in alone. I stood there at the edge, just staring into the trees, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a one-time thing. Whatever it was, it had been here before. I thought back to other times I'd found odd things in the field. Pumpkins moved around, strange noises at night, but I'd always blamed it on animals. Now I wasn't so sure. The rest of the day, I was on edge. Every time I went outside, I kept looking over my shoulder. I even brought my dog with me when I checked the field again in the evening, but he didn't act strange, which made me wonder if whatever it was had moved on. But deep down, I knew it hadn't. That feeling of unease stuck with me, and it's still here now. As the sun set, I went out one last time, just to make sure everything was locked up. The field was quiet, but the memory of that morning was vivid. I could almost see it again, that tall, dark figure moving through the pumpkins. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm not making this up. I've lived here my whole life, and I've never seen anything like it. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a human. It was something else, something unknown, and that's the thing that gets me. I can't explain it, and I probably never will. I'm more cautious now when I go out to the fields, especially early in the morning. I carry a knife with me just in case, but what good would that do against something that size? I keep thinking about it over and over, and the fear hasn't gone away. It's like this shadow hanging over me, and I don't know if it'll ever lift. So yeah, that's what happened. I saw something in my pumpkin field that I can't forget, and no one believes me. But I know what I saw, and it's left me wondering what else is out there, hiding in the woods, just waiting for the next sunrise. Story 11. All right, I'll just get right into it because even typing this out makes my hands feel shaky. I don't know what we saw, but I know it wasn't a bear and it wasn't a person. It's been 3 weeks, and I still can't sleep for more than a couple hours at a time without jolting awake, thinking I hear those footsteps outside my window. It was the last weekend of September. Me and 3 of my buddies from work had planned this camping trip for months. We'd picked a spot in southeastern Indiana in one of those state forests that's supposed to be really secluded. We'd been there before a couple years back, and it was fine, quiet, normal. This time was different. We got there around 2 in the afternoon, set up our 2 tents, got a fire going, the usual stuff. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of weather that's perfect for camping. Everything was normal. We were laughing, cracking open a few beers, just unwinding. The whole first part of the day was exactly what you'd want. It started to get dark around 7, and that's when the woods got quiet. Dead quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like a blanket. You know how usually you hear crickets, maybe some owls, the rustle of leaves. There was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I remember mentioning it to my buddy Mark, and he just shrugged and said maybe a storm was coming. But the sky was clear. We cooked hot dogs on the fire, and the silence just sat there, pressing in on us. We kept our voices low without even really talking about it. It felt wrong to be too loud. It was around 9 o'clock when we first heard the sounds. It wasn't a howl or a scream, not like in the movies. It was a vocalization. That's the only word I can use. It was a deep, guttural sound, like a low groan mixed with a weird chuffing noise. It didn't sound close, but it didn't sound far away either. It came from the thick trees to the west of our camp. We all stopped talking and just looked at each other. My beer felt suddenly cold in my hand. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered. No one had an answer. We listened for a few minutes, but it didn't come again. We tried to laugh it off. "Probably just a weird owl," someone said. But no one believed it. It was too deep, too resonant. It vibrated in my chest. We decided to turn in a bit early, maybe around 10:30. The fire was dying down, and none of us really wanted to sit out in the dark anymore. We put all our food, chips, bread, a couple of those sealed containers of bean dip, some hot dog buns, into a big waterproof duffel bag and hung it from a high branch on a tree about 20 feet from the fire pit. We always did that to keep raccoons away. I was in a tent with Mark. The other 2 guys, Chris and Dave, were in the other tent. I remember lying in my sleeping bag, listening. The silence was still there, but now it was a listening silence, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound. Thump. It was a heavy, solid sound, like someone had dropped a big sack of potatoes on the ground. My heart was instantly hammering against my ribs. I lay there frozen, my ears straining. Mark was awake too. I could hear his breathing stop. Then came the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and heavy. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Each step sounded like it was crushing dry branches and leaves under a tremendous weight. It wasn't the skittering, light sound of a deer. It wasn't the clumsy, 4-legged tread of a bear. This was bipedal, 2 feet, walking, and it was close, right outside our tent. I could feel the vibrations through the ground. I remember the fabric of my sleeping bag felt rough against my chin, and I had it pulled up so high I was almost suffocating myself. I could smell the damp earth and my own fear sweat. Mark and I didn't dare move. We didn't even whisper. We just stared at the dark shape of the tent wall, knowing something was standing on the other side of that thin sheet of nylon. The footsteps circled our tent, slowly. I could hear it breathing now, a low, rhythmic huffing like a large animal that had been running. The smell hit me then. It's a smell I'll never forget. It was a mix of things, like a wet dog but stronger, and underneath that, was this foul, rotten smell, like old meat and decay. It was so thick I could almost taste it at the back of my throat. I felt like I was going to be sick. It stopped right by my head. I could see the silhouette of its legs through the tent fabric, blotting out the little bit of moonlight. It was huge. The legs were thick, like tree trunks. It just stood there for what felt like an hour, just breathing that foul, huffing breath. I was trembling so hard, I was afraid the vibrations would give me away. I had my eyes squeezed shut, praying it would just go away. Then the footsteps started again, moving away from our tent. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I heard a low, rustling sound, and then a sharp rip. The food bag. It had found our food bag. We heard the sound of the heavy-duty canvas tearing open. It wasn't a careful opening. It was a violent rip. Then we heard the sounds of eating. It was messy, loud, grunts and smacking sounds, and the crinkle of plastic packaging being crushed. Mark finally risked a whisper, so quiet it was barely a breath. It's got the food. We lay there for another 10 minutes, just listening to it destroy our supplies. The fear was starting to be edged out by a weird, practical anger. That was all our food for the weekend. I was the one who'd bought that bean dip. I love that stuff. Stupid, I know, to be thinking about bean dip at a time like that, but your brain does weird things. The eating sounds stopped. Then we heard it. A new sound, a low, curious sniffing. It was right outside our tent again. It was like it knew we were in here, and it was deciding what to do about us. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I don't know why I did it. Curiosity, maybe. Or maybe some part of me needed to see what was making those sounds, needed to put a shape to the terror. I slowly, so slowly, it felt like my joints were creaking, unzipped the mosquito netting on the tent door, just a few inches, just enough to peek out. The moon was out from behind the clouds, and the clearing was bathed in a pale, silvery light, and it was right there, maybe 15 feet away, squatting on its haunches next to the torn open duffel bag. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel like a child. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in long, dark hair, almost black, but it was matted and clumped. It wasn't like a bear's fur. It was more like the hair on a buffalo, shaggy and coarse. Its back was to me, and its shoulders were impossibly wide. They were rounded and powerful, like a professional wrestler's, but on a giant scale. It was focused on the bag. Its head was large and blocky, sitting on a thick neck that seemed to merge right into its shoulders. It had one of the containers of bean dip in its hand. Not the plastic container. It had ripped the lid off and was holding the actual sealed foil tub. It brought the tub to its face, and I saw its fingers. They were long and dark and ended in thick, dirty-looking nails. It used its fingers to scoop out a huge glob of the dip and shoved it into its mouth. I was frozen, just watching this impossible thing eat our bean dip. My mind was screaming, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't an animal I knew. This wasn't anything I knew. Then it stopped eating. It went still. Its head tilted slightly, as if it had heard something, and then slowly it began to turn its head. I saw its profile. The brow was heavy and prominent, shadowing its eyes. I couldn't see them clearly, just deep-set sockets. The nose was broad and flat. The mouth was partly open, and I could see its teeth were large and blocky. It wasn't a human face. It wasn't an ape's face. It was something else entirely. It was looking right at me. It knew I was there. It knew I was watching. Time stopped. I was staring into the face of this creature, and it was staring back at me. There was no aggression in its look, no curiosity even. It was just a calm, assessing look. It felt ancient. It felt intelligent. The fear that shot through me then was colder than any I'd ever felt. It was a primal, gut-level terror that told me I was looking at something that didn't belong in my world. Then it did the thing that scared me more than any charge or roar could have. It just stood up. It unfolded itself from its squat, with an easy, fluid motion that was shockingly casual for something so huge. There was no effort, no groan of muscle. It just rose to its full, terrifying height. It was even bigger than I'd thought. It loomed over the clearing. It looked at me for one more second, then turned, and it walked away. It didn't run. It didn't hurry. It just walked, with that same heavy crunch, crunch, crunch pace, straight into the wall of trees to the east. It moved through the undergrowth like it wasn't even there, the branches and saplings just parting for it. In less than 10 seconds it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I stayed there, my face pressed to the mesh, for I don't know how long. I couldn't move. The smell was still there, lingering in the air. The silence returned, deeper than before. Mark finally shook my shoulder. "What did you see?" he hissed, his voice trembling. I couldn't answer him. I just zipped the mesh shut, rolled over, and curled into a ball in my sleeping bag. I was shaking uncontrollably. I didn't sleep another second that night. None of us did. We just lay there in the dark, listening. As soon as the first hint of grey light touched the sky, we were moving. We didn't speak. We just started frantically packing up our tents, stuffing our sleeping bags into their sacks. Our hands were fumbling, clumsy with fear and lack of sleep. We didn't even look at the food bag. We just left it there, torn and empty, a white flag in the middle of the clearing. We were packed and in the car before the sun was fully up. We drove to the ranger station at the edge of the forest to let them know we were leaving early. The ranger, an older guy with a kind face, saw our expressions and just nodded. "Rough night?" he asked. We all just kind of stammered. Mark was the one who managed to say, an animal, got into our food." The ranger's expression changed. It became careful, neutral. What did it look like? We didn't know what to say. I finally muttered, "Big, really big." He leaned on the counter and lowered his voice. "You're the third group this month to report something like that. A big animal, walking on 2 legs, tearing into food supplies. One guy last week said it stole a whole cooler of steaks." We just stared at him. He didn't say the word. He didn't have to. We saw it in his eyes. He'd heard this before. He believed it. We drove home in almost total silence. The normal world outside the car windows, the gas stations, the billboards, the other cars, felt like a dream. What felt real was the memory of that thing, standing up, looking at me and walking away like it owned the woods and everything in them. I haven't been camping since. I don't think I ever will again. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. Not as a monster, not as some mythical beast. I see it as a creature just going about its business, and I see the way it looked at me. It wasn't a look you give to prey. It was a look of simple acknowledgement, a look that said, "I am here. You are in my place." And then it just walked off into the trees, leaving me there, forever scared with the smell of wet fur and rotten meat, and the sight of an empty bean dip container. Story 12. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for weeks now. I live in a pretty rural part of Illinois, out near the woods, where it's quiet most of the time. That day, it was a Saturday in late September, and I'd spent the whole afternoon doing yard work. You know how it is, raking leaves, mowing the lawn, trimming back some bushes that were getting out of hand. I was exhausted, covered in sweat and dirt, and just wanted to collapse on the couch with a beer. The sun was starting to go down, casting long shadows across the yard. It was that time of day where everything gets kind of golden and peaceful, and the air has that crisp fall feel to it. I just put my tools away in the shed and was heading back to the house when I decided to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not even the usual birds chirping or squirrels rustling in the trees. It felt off, but I brushed it off as just being tired. I was standing at the kitchen sink, filling up a glass, when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye through the window above the sink. At first I thought it was a deer, We get them all the time here, especially around dusk. But this was different. It was too tall, and it was walking upright. My heart kind of skipped a beat, and I leaned in closer to the window, squinting to see better. What I saw made my blood run cold. This thing was huge, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, with shoulders that were broad and powerful looking. It was covered in thick, matted hair that was dark brown, almost black, and it moved in a way that was both graceful and heavy, like it weighed a ton but knew how to step lightly. It was walking across the yard, heading from the tree line toward my tool shed. I froze, my hand still on the faucet, and just stared. The figure paused right near the shed, and that's when I got a better look. Its head turned slowly like it was scanning the area, and for a second I thought it was looking right at me. I could see its face. It was human-like, but not quite. The eyes were deep-set and glinted in the fading light, almost like they were reflecting something. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, aware. The nose was flat, and the mouth was set in a kind of grim line. The hair around its face was tangled and wild, and I could see muscles rippling under that thick coat as it moved. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember my hands starting to shake, and I had to grip the edge of the sink to steady myself. I couldn't look away. It took a step closer to the shed, and I saw how its feet sank into the grass. Not like a person's, but with a weight that made the ground seem soft. It didn't make a sound, though. No crunching leaves, no twigs snapping, nothing. That silence was eerie, like the whole world had gone mute. I don't know what came over me, but I had to see more. I slowly moved away from the sink and crept toward the back door, which has a bigger window. My legs felt like jelly, and every step I took was careful, like if I made too much noise it would hear me. When I got to the door, I peered out, and that's when it turned its head again, and those eyes locked onto mine. It was only for a second, but it felt like an eternity. There was no anger or aggression in its gaze, just this intense, curious stare that made my skin crawl. Then it moved. It didn't run or hurry. It just stepped behind the shed and vanished. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. I stood there, rooted to the spot. My breath caught in my chest. The yard was empty again, but the image of that thing was burned into my mind. I could still see the way it moved, the way its shoulders shifted, and those eyes. God, those eyes. After what felt like forever, I forced myself to move. I had to see if it was really gone. I unlocked the back door and stepped outside, my heart still racing. The air was cool, and I could smell the damp earth from the yard work earlier. I walked slowly toward the shed, my eyes darting around, expecting to see it pop out from somewhere. But there was nothing, just the quiet yard, the shadows getting longer, and the faint sound of the wind in the trees. When I reached the spot where it had been, I looked down at the ground. The grass was flattened in a couple of places, like something heavy had stood there, but there were no clear footprints, no tracks, no broken branches, nothing. It was like it had never been there at all. I checked around the shed behind it, even in the bushes nearby, but there was no sign, no hair, no scent, nothing. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. Back in the house, I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking, and I could feel cold sweat on my forehead. I kept replaying it in my head. The way it moved, the look in its eyes, the sheer size of it. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears around here, and they don't walk upright like that. It wasn't a person in a costume. No one could move that smoothly or be that tall and bulky. This was something else. I spent the next hour or so just staring out the window, half expecting it to come back, but it didn't. The night settled in and the yard was dark and quiet. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made me jump. I kept thinking about what I'd seen, and the more I thought about it, the more scared I got, because it felt real, too real to be my imagination. The next day, I talked to a couple of neighbors, cautiously bringing it up. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I had to know if anyone else had seen something. Turns out, a few people have had similar experiences over the years. One guy down the road said he saw a tall, hairy figure crossing his field late one night, and another woman mentioned hearing strange calls that didn't sound like any animal she knew. Hearing that made me feel a little less alone, but also more uneasy. If it's real, and it's out there, what does it want? Why was it in my yard? I've been more vigilant since then, keeping an eye on the woods, especially at dusk. I even installed some motion sensor lights, but they've never gone off for anything unusual. Part of me hopes I never see it again, but another part is curious, wondering what it was and why it was there. I don't have any answers, and that's the hardest part. No tracks, no evidence, just this vivid memory that haunts me. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. All I know is that it was real, and it's left me with a fear that I can't shake. Every time I look out at the yard now, I remember those eyes, and I wonder if it's still out there, watching. Story 13. Okay, so I've never really talked about this in public before, but I've been reading some of the stories on here, and it's got me thinking. Maybe it's time I got this off my chest. This happened back in the spring of 1972, but to understand why it scared me so bad, I gotta go back a bit. When I was a kid, around 11 or 12, so like 1962 or 63, I saw something up in the King's Range, right above the Eel River where we lived. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just start with that day in 72, because that's when everything came crashing back. And I knew I had to get out for good. It was a typical spring day, late April, I think. The air was cool but not cold, with that damp smell you get after a rain, all earthy and fresh. I'd moved back to the old place with my son, who was just a little guy then, maybe 5 or 6 years old. The house was nothing fancy, just a simple cabin my dad built years ago, perched on the mountainside with a view of the river below. We'd been there a couple of months, trying to make a go of it after some rough times. That day, I was outside splitting wood while my son played near the porch, tossing rocks and chasing bugs like kids do. Everything seemed normal at first, but then things started to feel off. I remember stopping for a breath, leaning on the axe handle, and noticing how quiet it was, like dead quiet. Normally that area is full of noise, birds chirping, squirrels chattering, the wind rustling through the trees. But all of a sudden, it was like someone had flipped a switch. The birds just stopped. No warning, no gradual fading. One minute they were there, the next, nothing. It was so eerie that the hairs on my arms stood up. I looked over at my son, and he'd stopped playing too, like he sensed it. He was just standing there, staring into the woods, his little face all serious. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe a storm was coming or something, but the sky was clear, a pale blue with a few wispy clouds. No wind, no nothing. Just this heavy, oppressive stillness that made my skin crawl. I called out to my son to come closer, and he did, but he was quiet, which wasn't like him. He was usually a chatterbox, always asking questions or making up stories, but now he just clung to my leg, not saying a word. That's when the feeling started, this intense, crawling sensation that we were being watched. It wasn't just a vague hunch. It was like a physical pressure, like eyes drilling into the back of my neck. I felt watched before, in the woods or at night, but this was different. This was raw, primal fear. My heart started pounding, and I could feel sweat trickling down my temples even though it wasn't hot. I kept scanning the tree line, expecting to see something, but there was nothing there, just the dark, thick woods staring back. My mind flashed back to when I was a kid. I must have been 11 or 12, around 1962 or 63. I was walking down to the spring below our house to fetch water. It was a path I'd taken 100 times, winding through tall firs and madrones, with the ground soft underfoot from fallen needles. Halfway down, I saw it, a creature standing upright near the water, covered in dark, shaggy hair. It was big, like way bigger than a man, and it moved like an ape, but it was standing on two legs. I froze for a second, my blood turning cold, and then I turned and ran like hell back to the house. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my friends. I was too scared they'd think I was crazy or making it up. For years I pushed it down, told myself it was just my imagination, a shadow or a bear or something. But then, years later, after our house burned down and we moved to Eureka, I finally told my sister about it. We were sitting in her kitchen, and it just came out. I expected her to laugh or brush it off, but she didn't. She started crying right there at the table and said she'd seen the same thing at that spring when she was younger. She described it exactly like I did. Tall, hairy, standing on a log above her, looking down. We both just sat there, stunned, realizing we'd kept this secret from each other for all those years. That memory came rushing back on that day in '72, and it made the fear 10 times worse. Back to that spring day, I was trying to act normal for my son's sake, but inside I was panicking. The feeling of being watched was getting stronger, like whatever was out there was closing in. I could feel my breaths getting shallow, and my hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the axe tighter to steady them. I decided we should go inside, maybe lock the doors and wait it out. But as I herded my son toward the cabin, I noticed something else. The animals were gone. Not just the birds, but everything. No squirrels, no deer, not even insects buzzing around. It was like the whole forest had emptied out, and we were the only ones left. Inside, the cabin felt small and cramped, but not safe. The windows seemed like eyes, and every creak of the floorboards made me jump. My son was quiet, just sitting on the floor, playing with a toy truck. But he kept glancing at the door like he was waiting for something. I tried to distract myself by packing a few things, just in case. Clothes, some food, a flashlight, stuff we might need if we had to leave in a hurry. But the whole time, that feeling was there, a constant weight on my chest. Then, around late afternoon, the silence broke, but not in a good way. From outside, I heard a sound. A low, guttural grumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the ground like a deep hum you feel in your bones. My son looked up, his eyes wide with fear, and whispered, "What's that, Dad?" I didn't have an answer. I peered out the window, but the woods were still and dark, the shadows stretching long as the sun started to dip. That sound, it reminded me of what I'd heard as a kid, right before I saw that thing. Back then, it was a similar low noise, like rocks grinding together, but I'd forgotten it until now. Hearing it again, after all these years, sent a chill down my spine that I can still feel when I think about it. I knew then that we couldn't stay. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a certainty. Something was out there and it knew we were here. I made a decision right then. We had to go. Not tomorrow, not after dark. Now. I grabbed the bag I'd packed, took my son's hand, and told him we were going on a little hike. I didn't want to scare him more than he already was, but he must have sensed my urgency because he didn't argue. We slipped out the back door, away from the front where the woods were thickest, and started down the trail toward the nearest house, which was about a mile or so down the mountain. The hike out was the longest mile of my life. Every step felt like I was walking through mud, my legs heavy with fear. The trail was narrow, flanked by dense bushes and trees that seemed to lean in, blocking out the light. I kept my son close, his small hand gripping mine tightly, and I could feel him trembling. I was too, but I tried to keep it together for him. We moved as fast as we could, but it felt like we were in slow motion. Every rustle in the bushes, every snap of a twig made my heart leap into my throat. I didn't look back, not once. I was too afraid of what I might see. About halfway down, the feeling of being watched peaked. It was so intense that I actually stumbled, my foot catching on a root. I caught myself before I fell, but my son let out a little cry, and I had to scoop him up into my arms to keep us moving. He was light, but my arms were shaking so bad I almost dropped him. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, and the sound of our footsteps crunching on the path. But underneath it all, that low grumble was still there, faint but persistent, like a background noise you can't ignore. I remember the details so clearly, the way the damp air clung to my skin, the smell of pine and decay, the way my son's hair felt against my cheek as I carried him. His little body was tense, and he buried his face in my shoulder, not making a sound. I kept talking to him in a low voice, telling him we were almost there, that everything was going to be okay, but I wasn't sure I believed it myself. My mind was racing, going over every story I'd ever heard about things in the woods, and that childhood memory kept surfacing. The image of that dark, hairy thing standing by the spring, its eyes fixed on me. When we finally reached the bottom of the trail and saw the lights of the nearest house through the trees, I almost cried with relief. It was a small place owned by an older couple, the Millers, who'd lived in the area for years. I didn't know them well, but I banged on their door like a madman. When Mrs. Miller opened it, her face was startled, and she took one look at us, me panting, my son clinging to me, both of us pale and shaking, and ushered us inside without a word. We stayed there that night, and I never went back to the old place. Not to live, not even to get the rest of our stuff. I called a friend later to help me pack up what was left, but I couldn't bring myself to set foot on that land again. The Millers were kind. They didn't ask too many questions, just gave us a warm meal and a bed. But I could tell from the way they looked at me that they understood. People in those parts have heard things, seen things they don't talk about much. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Was it the same creature I saw as a kid? Or something else? I don't know. All I know is that the fear was real, so real it drove me out for good. My son doesn't remember much of it now, thank God, but sometimes I catch him looking at old photos of the place, and he gets quiet. I never told him the whole story, just that we had to leave because it wasn't safe, and that's the truth. Whatever is up there in the King's Range, it's not something I ever want to face again. Story 14. Okay. I'll do my best to write this for you, just so you know this isn't easy for me to talk about, even now. I don't post much online, but I feel like I need to put this out there, just in case someone else has seen something similar. I need to get it off my chest. So, a few years back, I was working as a nurse practitioner up in Alberta. The work was intense, non-stop, and I was completely burned out. I decided to take a proper vacation, just me, my camping gear, and my car. I drove down from Canada into Montana to Glacier National Park. I'd heard it was beautiful, and I needed some serious quiet. I set up camp at the Many Glacier Campground. It was stunning, just like the pictures, but pictures never really capture the scale of the place, the sheer weight of the mountains, and the silence that isn't really silent at all. The day it happened started out perfect. It was one of those clear, bright, late summer days where the sky is so blue, it almost hurts to look at. I decided on a relatively easy hike just a few miles out to a spot called Fisher Cap Lake, and then on to Red Rock Falls. The trail was gorgeous, winding through these dense stands of pine and fir, the air smelling like warm sap and damp earth. I remember the sound of my boots on the path, a steady crunch that was almost meditative. I got to the lake first. It was this perfect little mirror of water, so still it reflected the mountains and the trees like a photograph. I didn't stay long, just kept moving towards the falls. When I got there, the sound hit me first. It wasn't a deafening roar, but a constant, powerful rush of white noise. The water was this incredible milky turquoise color, churning over these red rocks that gave the place its name. I found a flat, sun-warmed slab of rock right near the water's edge, just off the main trail. The sun was warm on my skin. The sound of the water was like a lullaby, and I was tired from the hike and from months of work. I just lay back, using my backpack as a pillow, thinking I'd just rest my eyes for a minute. The next thing I knew, I was jerking awake, and the world was completely different. The sun was gone. The light was this thick, gloomy purple, the kind that comes just before full dark, dusk. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I'd slept for hours. The temperature had plummeted and I was shivering in my t-shirt. The sound of the falls, which had been soothing before, now sounded loud and menacing, like it was trying to drown out everything else. Panic just flooded me. I was alone and it was getting dark fast. I scrambled to my feet, my muscles stiff and cold, slung my backpack on, and started practically running back down the trail. My mind was racing, just repeating, stupid, stupid, stupid. I was trying to move too fast for the fading light, my eyes struggling to pick out roots and rocks on the path. And that's when it happened. 1 minute I was half jogging, the next my foot caught on something, a root, a rock, I'll never know, and I was flying forward. I didn't have time to put my hands out in a controlled way. It was a pure instinctual flail. I came down hard, and I heard it. It wasn't a snap, not like in the movies. It was more of a sickening, wet crunch, like stepping on a bunch of twigs, both of my wrists. The pain was immediate and blinding, a white-hot fire that shot all the way up my arms and made my vision swim. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed up by the goddamn waterfalls. I rolled, or maybe I just fell off the side of the trail. It wasn't a cliff, just a steep, bushy incline. I tumbled down through scratchy branches and leaves and landed in a thick patch of huckleberry bushes. The impact sent another jolt of agony through my arms. I was lying on my back, staring up at the darkening purple sky through the leaves, and I couldn't move my hands at all. They were just useless, throbbing lumps of pain attached to my arms. I tried to push myself up with my elbows, but the ground was soft and uneven, and the huckleberry bushes were dense. Every little movement sent fresh waves of nausea through me. I tried to shout for help, but my voice was thin and reedy, a pathetic little sound that got absolutely erased by the constant booming rush of the falls. I was maybe only 20-30 yards from the trail, but I might as well have been on the moon. Nobody could hear me, nobody was coming. That first night was the longest of my life. The pain was a constant screaming presence. I was shivering uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. I could feel the cold dampness of the ground seeping through my clothes. Every little sound in the woods, a twig snapping, the rustle of some small animal, made me jump, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was terrified, but the pain was so overwhelming it almost dwarfed the fear. Almost. The days blurred together after that. I lost track of time. It might have been 2 days, it might have been 3. I had a little water in my bottle, but it was gone by the end of the first day. I was so thirsty, my mouth felt like it was full of cotton and sand. The hunger came later, a deep, gnawing ache in my gut. I was lying in a patch of huckleberries, but I couldn't pick them. I tried to lean my head down and nibble some off the bush, but the movement was agony, and I only got a few bitter, underripe ones. The pain in my wrists was changing. At first it was sharp and acute, but as the days went on, it became a deep, hot, throbbing ache. I could feel them swelling, pressing against the skin. I'm a nurse, I knew what was happening. Infection was setting in. I was getting dehydrated, probably going into shock. My thoughts started getting fuzzy. I'd drift in and out of consciousness, dreaming of cold water and warm beds, then waking up to the nightmare of the pain, the thirst, and the sound of those damn falls. I remember at one point, I was so out of it, I thought I saw a person standing over me, just a dark shape against the trees. I tried to call out, but my throat was so dry, all that came out was a croak. The shape was gone. I wrote it off as a hallucination. My brain was just giving up. The last day, I knew I was dying. It wasn't a dramatic realization, just a quiet, cold certainty. I was too weak to even shiver anymore. The pain was still there, but it felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. I remember staring at a single huckleberry leaf right in front of my face, tracing the veins with my eyes, thinking that this was the last thing I was ever going to see. I was just waiting. And then something changed. The forest got quiet. Not completely silent, but the normal little noises, the birds, the squirrels, the rustling leaves, just stopped. It was like someone had thrown a switch. The only sound was the waterfall, and now it sounded even louder in the emptiness. My skin prickled. This wasn't a hallucination. This was a real physical change in the environment. A primal part of my brain, the part that knows about predators, woke up. I heard it then, a heavy, deliberate crunching sound, not the light, skittering steps of a deer. This was weight. Something big was moving through the woods, and it was getting closer. My heart, which had been beating so slow and weak, suddenly started pounding again, a frantic drum against my ribs. Fear, pure and sharp, cut through the haze of my delirium. This was it. A bear had found me. I was going to be eaten alive. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would be quick. The footsteps stopped. I could feel a presence. It was blocking what little light was left. I could smell it too, a musky, earthy smell, like wet dog and old leaves and pure, wild animal. It was overwhelming. I forced my eyes open. It wasn't a bear. It was standing on two legs, tall, so tall. It was silhouetted against the deep blue of the twilight sky, and I couldn't make out any features. Just a massive, shaggy, human-like shape. Broad shoulders, long arms that hung down past its knees. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't possible. This was the thing from campfire stories, from blurry photos. This was Bigfoot. Every cell in my body was screaming, "Predator!" I was frozen, paralyzed with a terror so complete I couldn't even make a sound. I just stared, waiting for it to lunge, to tear me apart. This was 1,000 times worse than the thought of a bear. But it didn't move. It just stood there looking down at me. I could feel its eyes on me, though I couldn't see them. Then, slowly, it crouched down. It moved with a strange, fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so huge. Now I was closer. I could see more. Its fur wasn't just brown. It was a mix of dark browns and grays, matted in places. The smell was stronger now, but it wasn't the aggressive smell of a carnivore. It was just wild. It made a low sound, not a growl, more like a deep, rumbling hum. It was looking at my arms, at my swollen, useless wrists. Then it did something I will never, ever forget. It reached behind itself, and from some kind of pouch or fold I hadn't noticed, it pulled out something. It was a rough, flat cake about the size of my hand. It looked like it was made of mashed up bark and leaves, packed together. It held it out to me. I was still terrified, my mind reeling. Was this food? Was it poison? I didn't know what to do. I just lay there, trembling. It made that low humming sound again, and gently, so gently, it brought the cake up to my mouth. Its fingers were huge, thick, and covered in coarse hair, but its touch was surprisingly careful. It pressed the cake against my lips. I was too weak, too scared, too everything to resist. I opened my mouth a little, and it broke off a piece of the cake and placed it on my tongue. The taste was immediate and awful, incredibly bitter, like chewing on aspirin. My first instinct was to spit it out, but I was too afraid. I forced myself to swallow it. It was dry and gritty. It gave me another piece and then another, until the small cake was gone. The bitterness coated my mouth and throat. Then it reached into the huckleberry bushes beside me, its huge hand deftly plucking a bunch of berries. It fed those to me too, one by one, the sweet juice helping to cut the horrible bitterness of the cake. And then, the pain started to fade. Not all the way, but the sharp, burning, throbbing agony in my wrists began to recede, softening into a dull, manageable ache. A deep, heavy warmth spread through my body, pushing back the cold that had been living in my bones for days. My fuzzy thoughts cleared just a little. I was still weak, still terrified, but the edge of the suffering was gone. As a nurse, I recognized the effect. It was an analgesic, an anti-inflammatory, salicylic acid. It's in willow bark. It's what aspirin is derived from. This thing had just medically treated me. The terror was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was mixed with something else, a bewildering, impossible sense of care. It had helped me. It had seen I was in pain, and it had given me something for it. It watched me for a few more minutes, its head tilted, then it moved again. It slid one massive arm under my back and the other under my knees. It lifted me like I was weightless, a child. I gasped, but there was no jolt of pain. It cradled me against its chest. The fur was coarse but thick and surprisingly warm. The musky smell was all around me now, but it was just a smell, not a threat. I could feel the powerful muscles in its arms and chest, a living engine of strength. I was too stunned to do anything. I just lay there in its arms, my head against its shoulder, watching the trees go by as it walked. It didn't walk back towards the falls. It moved through the woods with an unerring sense of direction, navigating the dense undergrowth like it was a paved path. It moved silently, its footsteps making no sound now. It was carrying me, and it was like being carried by a ghost. The forest was still preternaturally quiet around us. I don't know how long it walked. It felt like both an eternity and only a few minutes. Then I saw lights through the trees, electric lights. We emerged from the tree line into a small gravel parking lot. I recognized it. It was a trailhead parking lot for one of the cabins not far from the main campground. There was a single car parked there. It stopped at the very edge of the woods, still hidden in the shadows. It bent down and laid me gently on the gravel, my back propped against a large pine tree. It was so careful with my arms, positioning them in my lap. It looked down at me one last time. In the faint glow from the distant parking lot light, I finally saw its eyes. They were a deep, intelligent brown, and they held no malice, just a quiet, ancient knowing. Then it straightened up, filled its huge lungs, and let out a sound. It wasn't a roar, it was a howl, but unlike anything I've ever heard. It was deafening, a piercing, ululating shriek that seemed to tear right through the fabric of the night. It was a sound of pure, raw power, a sound that could shatter glass and stop hearts. It vibrated in my chest, in my teeth. It was the most horrifying sound I have ever witnessed. As the echo was still bouncing off the mountains, it turned and melted back into the forest. It was just gone. 1 second it was there, a massive silhouette. The next, the darkness had swallowed it whole. The sound had done its job. A light came on in the cabin. A door slammed. I heard voices, shouts. A man and a woman came running out, their flashlight beams cutting through the dark. They found me sitting against the tree, covered in dirt, my arms clearly broken, my eyes probably wide with a shock that had nothing to do with my injuries. The rest is a blur of paramedics, hospitals, surgeries. Both wrists were badly broken, compound fractures. I was severely dehydrated, suffering from hypothermia and a systemic infection. They told me I was lucky to be alive. They kept asking me how I got to the parking lot. I tried to tell them at first. I said something carried me, the looks they gave me. I saw the doubt, the pity. They wrote it off as delirium, hallucinations from the pain and exposure. So I stopped talking about it. I spent months in recovery, first in Montana, then back in Canada. Physical therapy, learning to use my hands again, but my mind was healing too, or trying to. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The terror of its appearance, the gentleness of its touch, the bitterness of that cake, the warmth that followed, the safety of its arms, and that final, earth-shattering howl. It changed the entire course of my life. I couldn't go back to my old job. It felt too small, too confined. I moved north to Whitehorse in the Yukon. I started studying, really studying, medicinal plants. I wanted to understand what it had given me. I spend my days now learning about the old ways, the plant knowledge that was here long before we were. I look for willow bark, I taste its bitterness, and I remember. Most of the time I can almost convince myself it was a hallucination, a bizarre, detailed fantasy my dying brain cooked up to comfort me. The human mind is capable of incredible things under duress. That's the logical explanation, the one I tell my doctor, but then I'll be out in the woods, alone, and I'll catch a certain smell on the wind, wet earth and old leaves, or I'll hear a branch break just a little too heavily, and the hair on my arms will stand up, and I know it was real. I was saved by something that shouldn't exist, something wrapped in wonder and terror, and I will never have a single answer for any of it. I just live with it. The memory is just there, a part of me now, as real as the scars on my wrists. Story 15. All right, I'm just going to type this out. I've been putting it off for over a year now, but I need to get it out of my head. Maybe writing it down will help. Maybe it'll make it worse. I don't know, but I can't keep carrying this around by myself. So, for context, I've been hog hunting in Lyon County, Texas for more than a decade. I know these woods and creek bottoms like the back of my hand. I've got all the gear, high-end thermal scopes, night vision, the whole setup. It's not just a hobby, it's a necessity out here. Hogs are a real problem, tearing up land, and I've gotten good at managing them. I'm out there at least a couple times a month, usually at night when they're most active. I'm comfortable in the dark, or at least I was. The night it happened was March 14th, 2021, a Sunday. I remember because I'd spent the day doing chores and was looking forward to getting out, clearing my head. The property is private, a couple hundred acres belonging to a friend of mine who lets me hunt it. It's mostly rolling hills, thick with post oak and mesquite, with a sandy-bottomed creek cutting through the middle. That night the air was cool, not cold, with a bit of a breeze that kept the mosquitoes down. A perfect night for hunting. I'd parked my ATV on a high spot overlooking a creek bottom, a place I'd set up 100 times before. I had my rifle, a .308, and my thermal scope, a nice AGM model that turns the world into shades of black, white, and hot white. You learn to read the heat signatures. A hog is a compact, low-slung blob of heat. A deer is taller, more skittish. You get a feel for it. It was probably around 10:30 at night. I'd been sitting for about an hour just scanning, listening to the usual night sounds, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind. I saw some movement down in the creek bottom, about 150 yards out. Through the scope, it was just a blur of heat at first, moving through the thick brush. I figured it was a sounder of hogs, maybe a big one. Moving down to the water, I settled in, getting ready for a shot. I put the crosshairs on the lead blob, my finger resting on the safety, but something felt off. The movement was wrong. Hogs don't move in a straight, smooth line like that. They zigzag, they root, they stop and start. This was fluid, purposeful, and it was too tall. Way too tall. I adjusted the focus on my scope, my heart starting to thump a little harder. The thermal signature sharpened, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a hog. It wasn't a deer. It was an upright figure, a massive, upright figure. My brain just short-circuited for a second. It was walking on two legs, through brush that came up to my waist. But its heat signature was clear as day. It had to be over 8 feet tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing dwarfed anything I'd ever seen. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and its arms were long, swinging slightly as it moved. It walked with this confident, deliberate gait, like it owned the place. It wasn't in a hurry. It was just traveling. It came out of the thicker brush and into a more open area, a little meadow beside the creek. That's when I got the clearest look. The thermal showed a humanoid shape, but all wrong. The proportions were off. The torso was thick, powerful looking, and the head seemed to sit directly on the shoulders, no real neck to speak of. It was just a solid wall of heat, moving across that open field like it was taking a stroll through a park. My hands were sweating. I fumbled for my phone, which I have rigged to my scope for recording. I hit record, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the damn thing. I got maybe 15-20 seconds of video. Just this tall, white-hot figure on a black background, walking steadily, smoothly, from one tree line to another. It never looked around, never hesitated. It just walked, and then it reached the far tree line and vanished into the shadows. The heat signature just got swallowed up by the cooler trees. I lowered my rifle, my breath coming in shallow gasps. What the hell was that? A bear? No bears out here. A person in a ghillie suit, at night, in the middle of private property, and moving like that. It didn't make any sense. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, and coming up completely empty. That's when the fear really started to set in. It was a cold knot in my stomach. I was still standing by my ATV, just staring into the darkness where it had disappeared. The normal night sounds had gone quiet. The crickets had stopped. The woods were dead silent. That's never a good sign. Then I heard it, a sound that I felt more than I heard, a low, deep, vibrating growl. It wasn't loud, but it had so much bass to it that I felt it in my chest, like when you stand next to a subwoofer. It wasn't a hog squeal, wasn't a coyote, wasn't anything I'd ever heard in my life. It was a guttural, intelligent sound. It seemed to come from the direction the thing had gone, but it also seemed to be all around me. Right after that, from further off in the woods, I heard a loud thump, a single solid wood knock, like someone had taken a big branch and slammed it against a tree trunk. It was sharp, percussive, and it echoed through the quiet bottom. My head snapped in the direction of the sound. Before I could even process that, I heard a splash in the creek, maybe 30 yards to my left. I flinched, swinging my rifle around. A rock, about the size of my fist, had landed in the middle of the creek. The water was still rippling. Someone or something had thrown it, and it hadn't been thrown randomly. It was thrown near me. A warning? A signal? My blood went cold. This wasn't random. The growl, the knock, the rock. It felt coordinated, like communication. Pure, unadulterated fear washed over me. I wasn't the hunter anymore. I was the prey. I've never felt so exposed in my life. I dropped into a crouch and scrambled behind my ATV, using it as a shield. I propped my rifle on the seat, my hands so slick with sweat I had to wipe them on my pants. I was scanning with the thermal scope again, sweeping the tree line, the creek bank, everywhere. For a few minutes, nothing. Just silence, and my own pounding heartbeat in my ears. I was trying to control my breathing, but it was coming in ragged little puffs. Then I saw it again. Closer this time, much closer, maybe 60 yards out, on my side of the creek. It had reappeared from behind a thicket of mesquite. It was crouched down, its huge form condensed into a ball of intense heat. It was turned sideways, and I could see its head was angled. It was looking right at me. I know it was looking right at me. It was aware of me. It had known I was there the whole time. That was the most terrifying part. That feeling of being observed, studied, long before I ever knew it was there. It had been watching me while I was scanning for hogs, and I had been completely oblivious. It moved its head slightly, and the heat signature in my scope shifted. It filled the lens. It was so close, so detailed. I could see the powerful musculature in its shoulders and back. I could see the way its head sat on its body. It wasn't just a big animal. There was an intelligence in its posture. In the way it held itself, it was assessing me. A wave of primal fear, the kind you read about, shot through me. It was a physical sensation, like ice water in my veins. My fingers were trembling on the rifle. I flicked the safety off. I didn't know what I was going to do. Shoot it? At what? I wasn't even sure I could. My brain was screaming at me to get out of there, but my body was frozen. It held that crouch for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then, in one smooth, powerful motion, it stood up to its full, immense height. It didn't make a sound. It just turned and took 2 long, silent strides back into the thicker woods. It moved with an eerie grace for something so large, just melting into the shadows. The thermal signature faded as it moved behind trees, and then it was gone. I didn't move. I stayed behind that ATV, rifle pointed at the spot where it vanished, for I don't know how long. My legs were cramping. The woods were still silent. After a while, maybe 10 minutes, I heard another wood knock. This one was further away, then another, even further. It was like it was moving off, reporting back or something. I stayed put for an hour, a full hour, just listening. I heard a few more distant knocks, but nothing else. No more growls, no more rocks. The normal night sounds slowly started to trickle back in. The cricket started chirping again, tentatively. That was the only thing that gave me the courage to move. I didn't even bother packing up properly. I just got on my ATV, started it up, and got the hell out of there. I didn't turn the headlights on until I was back on the main trail, driving way too fast for the terrain, my heart still hammering against my ribs. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my kitchen with all the lights on, staring at the wall. The next morning, as soon as the sun was fully up, I drove back out there. I had to know. I had to see if there was any evidence, or if I'd just lost my mind. I went straight to the spot where I'd seen it last, where it had crouched and looked at me. The grass was flattened, not like something had lain down, but like something very heavy had been standing there, compressing the turf. And there, in a patch of soft, damp earth near the creek bank, I found the footprints. They were huge. I mean, unbelievably huge. I pulled out a tape measure from my toolkit, 17 inches long and wide. They were humanoid in shape, with 5 discernible toes, but they were just massive. The stride was long, effortless. I followed the tracks for a little way. They led back into the thicker woods, and I saw where it had pushed through some brush. Branches as thick as my wrist were snapped off about 7 feet up. That was it for me. I got back on my ATV and left. I haven't been back to that property at night since. I sold my thermal scope and my night vision gear a month later. I just couldn't look through them anymore. Every time I did, all I could see was that white-hot figure filling the lens, turning to look at me with a knowing intelligence that still haunts my dreams. The video clip is still on my phone. It's blurry, just a thermal image, but it's clear enough. I've shown it to a couple of close friends, hunters themselves, and they don't know what to make of it either. They see what I see, a tall bipedal thing walking through a field in the dead of night. I've spent over a year trying to rationalize it. A guy in a suit, a hoax, out there in the middle of nowhere, the coordination, the sounds, the sheer size of the tracks. It doesn't add up. The only thing that does add up is the fear I felt and still feel. It was a deep, instinctual terror that told me I was in the presence of something I was not supposed to see, something that was far more at home in those woods than I could ever be. That moment, when its heat signature filled my scope and it turned, knowing I was there. That's the moment that's burned into my brain. That's the terror moment. I felt so small, so vulnerable. I'd spent years feeling like I was in control out there, a predator in the dark. That night I learned I was wrong. I was just visiting. Something else lives there, and it saw me. Story 16. It was June 25th, 2024. A Tuesday, I think. The date is burned into my head now. We were camping on some family land near Watson, Oklahoma. Not a proper campground, just a cleared-out spot by a creek that my wife's uncle lets us use. It was our first real trip of the summer. Just me, my wife, our 2 boys. One's 8, the other's 10, and our cattle dog, Duke. The day had been hot and still, the kind of Oklahoma heat that makes the air feel thick, but by evening it had cooled down to something nice. We'd set up our small camper, got a fire going in the stone ring, and I was cooking burgers and hot dogs on a grate we'd placed over the flames. The kids were throwing a football nearby, and my wife was sitting in a camp chair just watching the fire, looking peaceful. Duke was lying at her feet, panting, his tail thumping the dirt now and then. It was perfect. One of those moments you take a mental picture of, you know, where everything just feels right and easy. The sun was almost down, just an orange glow behind the trees, and the woods around us were getting dark. The fire was the main source of light, casting these big dancing shadows on the camper and the trees. I was flipping the last of the burgers when we heard it. It wasn't a branch breaking, it wasn't the wind. It was a knock, a single loud, deep thump that came from the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. It sounded like someone had taken a giant sledgehammer to the thickest part of a tree trunk. A solid, purposeful hit. Everything just stopped. My hand froze mid-flip. The burger spat on the grate. The football the kids were throwing just dropped between them, forgotten. My wife sat up straight in her chair, her book falling into her lap. We all turned our heads at the exact same time, looking out into the wall of shadows and trees. For a second, there was nothing. Just the crackle of the fire and the creek gurgling in the background. Then Duke let out this low growl from deep in his chest. A sound I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't his usual, "I see a squirrel" bark. It was a warning, a scared warning. He stood up, his whole body tense, his nose pointed right at where the sound came from. He was sniffing the air hard, like he was trying to pull a scent from it. His ears were flat against his head. We were all just frozen, staring into the darkness. My heart was thumping in my ears. I remember thinking, what the hell was that? It was too loud, too clean a sound to be natural. A falling branch cracks and splinters. This was just a boom. My 10-year-old whispered, "Dad?" "I don't know, buddy," I said, and my voice came out quieter than I meant it to. I was trying to listen for anything else. Footsteps, rustling, another knock, but there was nothing. Just that heavy, waiting silence. After a minute that felt like 10, my wife said, "Probably just a deadfall." She said it, but she didn't sound like she believed it. She was still staring into the trees. "Yeah," I said, forcing myself to turn back to the grill. "Probably." We tried to go back to what we were doing, but the mood was broken. The kids ate their burgers quietly. Duke wouldn't settle down. He kept pacing around the edge of the firelight, growling every few minutes, staring into the woods. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my neck prickling. It felt like we were being watched. You know that feeling, where the hair on your arms just stands up for no reason? I had that. The perfect evening was gone, replaced by this low-grade unease that hummed in the background. We finished eating, cleaned up, and got the kids ready for bed in the camper. We all went to bed a little earlier than planned. I remember lying there in the dark, listening. The woods at night are never silent, but you learn the normal sounds, the crickets, the owls, the rustle of possums or raccoons. That night, it felt different. It felt quiet. Too quiet. Like everything else out there was hiding too. I finally fell asleep, but it was a restless sleep. The next morning, we had to pack up and leave for a pre-planned trip to Texas to see my in-laws. The weirdness from the night before was still there, but in the daylight, it felt less threatening. We chalked it up to a weird tree sound and an overactive imagination. We packed the truck, hooked up the camper, and drove out. I remember looking back at the campsite as we left, everything looking normal and peaceful in the morning sun. We were in Texas for 4 days. It was a good visit, busy with family stuff, and the memory of the wood knock faded into the background. It became a weird story to tell over dinner. "Hey, you should have heard this sound in the woods." We drove back to Oklahoma on Sunday. It was late afternoon when we finally turned off the main road and bumped down the dirt track toward our campsite. The kids were excited to be back, talking about going fishing in the creek. Then we pulled into the clearing and everything was wrong. The first thing I saw was the dog food container. It's a big, heavy plastic bin with a clasp lid, the kind you need thumbs to open. We'd left it tucked up against the side of the camper. Now it was out in the middle of the clearing, about 20 feet from where it should have been. The lid was open, and dog food was scattered all over the ground. Not eaten, just thrown everywhere. My wife said, "What the hell?" I put the truck in park, and we all just sat there for a second, staring. Then I got out. My stomach was starting to knot up. As I walked closer, I saw more. The little folding shelves we had mounted on the outside of the camper wall, the ones we put the camp stove and lanterns on, were just gone. I looked around and saw one of them, a metal shelf with a wooden top bent in half and tossed into the bushes like it was made of foil. The brackets were still screwed into the camper wall, but the metal arms were just torn away from them. Then I saw the solar panel. I have a small solar panel mounted on the roof of the camper to keep the battery charged. It's held on by a custom-made metal frame welded onto the roof rack, or it was held on. The whole panel was ripped off. It was lying on the ground next to the camper, the glass cracked. The metal frame was still attached to it, but the welds that held the frame to the roof rack were snapped. Not unscrewed, not cut, snapped, like someone, or something, had just grabbed it and yanked until the metal gave way. That's when the real fear started to set in. A cold, heavy feeling in my gut. This wasn't kids. This wasn't vandals. Thieves? What thief would ignore the fishing rods leaning against a tree or the expensive cooler we'd left in the camper? They didn't take anything. They just destroyed, and the force needed to do this. I'm a big guy, I work with my hands, and there is no way I could have bent that shelf in half with a sledgehammer, let alone just with my hands and snapping welds on a steel frame. You'd need a hydraulic tool or something. My wife and the kids were out of the truck now. The kids were scared, staying close to their mom. Duke was going crazy, barking and pulling at his leash, his nose to the ground, sniffing everywhere. He wasn't growling like before. He was frantic, whining. "Get back in the truck," I told my wife. My voice was tight. She heard it. She herded the kids back into the truck and locked the doors. I walked around the campsite, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt exposed, like whatever did this could be watching me right now from the same tree line. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. I don't know why. I guess I needed proof for myself more than anyone. Proof that I wasn't crazy. I took a picture of the dog food scattered on the ground. I took a picture of the bent shelf in the bushes. I took close-ups of the snapped welds on the roof rack, the clean, shiny breaks in the metal. I took a picture of the solar panel lying on the ground. My hands were shaking so bad the pictures are a little blurry. As I was documenting it all, my mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A bear? There haven't been bears in this part of Oklahoma in decades, and a bear would have gone for the food inside the camper, or the dog food. It wouldn't have methodically ripped shelves off walls and torn a solar panel off a roof. And it wouldn't have opened a container that requires thumbs. That's the thing that got me the most, the dog food container. The lid has a specific clasp. You have to press a button with your thumb and lift a lever at the same time to open it. A raccoon can't do that. A bear can't do that. Nothing that lives in these woods should be able to do that. I stood there in the middle of the clearing, the phone heavy in my hand, and I just felt this profound, chilling wrongness. This wasn't random. The wood knock 2 nights before. It wasn't a coincidence. It was connected. It was a warning or an announcement. I'm here. I looked from the torn-off solar panel to the tree line 50 yards away. The same tree line we'd all stared into 2 nights ago. The woods were quiet, still. The air was dead. No birds, no bugs, nothing. And that's when it hit me. The local stories. I'd heard them my whole life living around here. Old-timers in town talking about the wood ape, about Bigfoot. I'd always laughed it off, written it off as drunk stories or people seeing bears. But standing there, looking at the evidence of something with immense strength and a level of intelligence, something that could open a clasp and seem to destroy things out of curiosity or spite, the stories didn't seem so funny anymore. This thing had been here in our camp while we were gone. It had rummaged through our stuff. It had tested its strength on our camper. It had been powerful enough to snap metal and bold enough to hang around a human campsite. I got the hell out of there. I didn't even try to clean anything up. I just got in the truck, told my wife we were leaving, and we drove straight home. The kids were crying in the back seat. My wife was pale, just staring straight ahead. We haven't been back. I don't think we ever will. I've shown the pictures to a few people. Some say it was a meth head. But what meth head has the strength to rip steel welds? And why wouldn't they steal anything? Others say it was a prank. A prank that requires industrial equipment, out in the middle of nowhere. I lay awake at night sometimes thinking about it. I think about that wood knock. I think about the feeling of being watched. I think about the sheer brute force it took to do that damage. I think about the opened container, the deliberate, almost intelligent nature of it. I can't explain it, not in any normal way. All the logical explanations fall apart when you look at the details. The only thing that fits, as crazy as it sounds, is the thing I never believed in. And the worst part, the part that really haunts me, isn't just the damage or the fear. It's the fact that I wasn't there to see it. I have this gut-deep, chilling wish that I had been there, hiding in the trees, just for a second, just to have seen what it was, to have seen the thing that walked into our camp and did that. Because not knowing, your mind just fills in the blanks with the worst things you can imagine, and my imagination is plenty good. I still have the pictures on my phone. I look at them sometimes, at the snapped metal and the scattered dog food, and I get this cold shiver down my spine. It happened, it was real, and I have no idea what it was. Story 17. It was one of those perfect late summer mornings, the kind that makes you forget about everything else. The air was cool, but the sun was warm on my skin, and me and my best friend, we decided to drive out to the trails near Midburg. We'd been going to this same spot since we were teenagers, a special little blueberry patch tucked away, about an hour's hike in. It was our tradition. Every year, around the same time, we'd pack some sandwiches, fill our water bottles, and just go. It was our thing, a way to reconnect, to talk about everything and nothing, away from jobs and bills and all the noise. That day was no different. We parked the car at the familiar gravel pull-off, the one with the old faded trail map behind a plexiglass case that was so scratched you could barely read it. We didn't need it anyway. We knew this path like the backs of our hands. The first part of the hike is all uphill, through a dense pine forest. The ground was soft with decades of fallen needles, and the smell was incredible. That clean, sharp scent of pine and damp earth. We were talking and laughing, the way you do when you're completely comfortable with someone. I was probably complaining about my landlord, and she was telling me some story about her new co-workers. Normal stuff, happy stuff. The trail eventually levels out and winds along a ridge before dipping down into a mixed forest of birch and spruce. That's where the blueberry bushes are, in a clearing that gets just the right amount of sun. We were maybe 10-15 minutes from the patch itself, still on the main trail. The laughter had died down to a comfortable silence, just the sound of our boots on the dirt and our breathing. The woods were quiet, not a scary quiet, just a peaceful mid-morning quiet. I was looking down, watching my step on a few loose rocks, when I glanced up and to the right, into the trees, and that's when I saw it. About 40 feet away, moving through the thick undergrowth between the spruce trees, was a figure. My brain didn't process it as wrong at first. It just registered person. But in the half second it took for my eyes to focus and my mind to catch up, the wrongness of it slammed into me like a physical blow. It was tall, really tall, at least 6 feet, but it seemed bigger because of how it was built. It was covered head to toe in this thick, shaggy, dark brown fur. It wasn't the clean fur of a bear. It was messier, almost matted in places. And it was a uniform color, like wet bark. It was moving away from us, stepping through the ferns and low bushes, and its back was to me. That's what I remember most clearly. The back. The shoulders were impossibly wide, way broader than any man's I'd ever seen. They weren't sloped. They were just these two massive shelves of muscle and fur. Its arms were long, so long. They hung down past its knees, and they swung slightly as it moved, but not loosely. They moved with a heavy, powerful purpose. Its head sat directly on its shoulders. There was no neck to speak of. It was just this blocky, rounded shape atop that huge frame. It wasn't walking like a person. It wasn't a stroll. It was more of a glide, a powerful, smooth motion. Its legs moved, but its upper body was incredibly still, like it was conserving energy, like it was built for this, for moving through dense forest without wasting a single motion. It took 2, maybe 3 steps while I was frozen there, just watching. Each step was silent. I didn't hear a twig snap, nothing. It just parted the foliage and moved through it. And then the terror hit. It wasn't a gradual thing, it was a flood. It was ice water in my veins, a sudden painful clenching in my chest so tight I couldn't breathe. My mouth went completely dry. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat that I could feel in my ears, my throat, my fingertips. This wasn't a person, this wasn't a bear, this was something else. Something my mind had no box for, no category to file it away in. The sheer wrongness of its proportions, the way it moved, the sheer mass of it, it was alien. It was a primal, ancient fear, the kind that bypasses your thoughts and goes straight to the lizard part of your brain that just screams, danger. I must have made a sound, a choked gasp, a tiny whimper, I don't know. My friend, who had been a few steps ahead of me, stopped and turned around. Her face was questioning, a little smile still lingering from whatever we'd been talking about. Her eyes met mine, and she saw the look on my face. I saw her smile vanish, replaced by confusion. And then, as she followed my frozen gaze into the trees, her own expression crumbled into pure, unadulterated fear. She didn't see it for as long as I did. She just got a glimpse, maybe the last second of it moving behind a large spruce, but it was enough. Her hand shot out and grabbed my forearm. Her grip was vice-tight, her fingers digging into my skin. There was no words, no, "What is that?" or "Oh my God." There was just this silent, mutual understanding that we were in the presence of something we were not supposed to see. We turned. It wasn't a decision, it was a reflex. One moment we were statues, the next we were running. We spun on our heels and we ran back the way we came, back up the trail towards the ridge. I've never moved like that in my life. It wasn't running. It was a blind, panicked flight. My backpack, which had felt so light before, was now slamming against my back with every pounding step. I could hear my own breath, ragged and wheezing in my throat. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears, and then I heard the other sounds. At first I was too consumed by my own panic to notice anything else. But my friend, she heard it first. Later, when we could barely speak about it, she told me she heard it the moment we started to run. Behind us, from the direction of the thing, there was a series of loud, sharp cracks, not like a gunshot, but like thick, dry branches being snapped in half. Not one, but several, in quick succession. Crack, 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 then a heavy rustling sound, like something very large and very heavy was moving through the brush. Fast. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The fear had a physical hold on me, a cold hand on the back of my neck pushing me forward. Looking back felt like it would mean death. It felt like if I turned my head, I would see it right behind me, those long arms reaching out, so I just ran. I focused on the back of my friend's jacket, on the dirt trail blurring beneath my feet, on the burning in my lungs. The run back to the car was a nightmare. The peaceful forest was now a tunnel of terror. Every shadow was a threat. Every rustle of a squirrel in the leaves made me jump. The uphill section that had been a mild workout on the way in was now a brutal, lung-searing climb. My legs felt like jelly, but the adrenaline kept them pumping. We didn't speak. We just ran. The only sounds our gasping breaths and the pounding of our feet. When we finally burst out of the tree line and saw the car sitting alone in the gravel pull-off, it was like seeing a lifeboat in a stormy sea. We didn't slow down until we were right next to it. My friend fumbled for the keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them on the ground. I snatched them up, my own hands just as unsteady, and I unlocked the doors. We practically fell into the car, slamming the doors shut and hitting the lock button simultaneously. The sound of the locks engaging was the most beautiful, relieving sound I have ever heard. We sat there for a full minute, maybe two, just breathing. The windows fogged up almost immediately from our panting. The car smelled of sweat and pine and sheer, undiluted fear. I looked at my friend. Her face was pale, beaded with sweat, her eyes wide and staring straight ahead through the windshield. I knew I looked the same. I started the car, my hand still trembling on the key. I didn't even put on my seatbelt. I just threw it into drive and spun the wheels on the gravel, speeding out of there as fast as I could. We didn't take the direct route back to the main road. Without even discussing it, I took a long, convoluted way home, driving down back roads and country lanes, constantly checking the rearview mirror. I wasn't looking for cops. I was looking for a dark, tall shape in the trees lining the road. The silence in the car was heavy, oppressive. We'd been laughing and talking just an hour before, and now we couldn't even form a sentence. What was there to say? Did you see that? Yeah, we both saw it. What was it? Neither of us had a clue. Saying it out loud felt like it would make it more real, like it would give it power. So we just drove, wrapped in our own private shaking horror. We got back to my apartment. We went inside. We locked the door. We sat on my couch, still in our hiking clothes, our dirty boots on the floor. We drank glasses of water with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. We finally talked, but it was in hushed, broken fragments. Its shoulders, I whispered. I heard the branches, she said, her voice thin. It was moving, after us. It wasn't a bear. No, it wasn't. And that was it. That was the extent of our discussion. We never gave it a name. We never called it Bigfoot or Sasquatch or anything else. To name it would be to categorize it, to bring it into the world of things we understand. And we didn't understand it. We just knew it was there, in our woods, and that we had seen it, and it had known we were there. That trail had been our sanctuary for over a decade. It was where we went to escape, to find peace, to be ourselves. It was our favorite place in the world. After that day, we never went back. We never even talked about going back. The memory of that fur-covered figure, the way it moved with that silent, powerful grace, the sheer size of it, the way its head sat directly on those massive shoulders. It instilled a deep-seated fear of the woods in me that I don't think will ever go away. I can't go camping anymore. I get anxious on long walks in big parks. The sound of branches snapping still makes my heart jump into my throat. It changed something fundamental in me. It peeled back a layer of the world and showed me that there are things in the deep, quiet places that we aren't meant to see. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, they see you back. I don't know what it was. I don't have an explanation. I just know what I saw. And I know the terror I felt. And I know that I will carry the memory of that dark, gliding shape in the spruce trees for the rest of my life. Story 18. It was September of 1996, and I was elk hunting with my buddy in Jackson County, Colorado. We were up near Rand, or Maybe it was closer to gold. I can't remember exactly. The names of these little towns all blend together after a while. All I know is we were deep in the backcountry, in this high-altitude clearing that was already dusted with an early snow. The air was so cold it felt sharp in my lungs, and the sky was that pale, washed-out grey that promises more snow. We'd been out since before first light, our boots crunching through a thin crust of white, our breath pluming out in front of us in little ghosts. My friend, he was about 50 yards to my left, hunkered down behind a fallen log. I was standing near a cluster of spruce trees, the branches heavy with snow. I remember thinking how quiet it was, not just quiet, but a deep, heavy silence. The kind where you can hear the blood pulsing in your own ears. You get that sometimes in the mountains, a stillness so complete it feels like the whole world is holding its breath. I had this cow elk call, a little reed thing you blow into. I'd used it 100 times before. You make this low, mewling sound, like a lonely cow elk, and if you're lucky, a bull will come investigating, thinking it's a female ready to mate. I put it to my lips and let out a series of calls. The sound seemed to get swallowed by the trees. Not even an echo came back. After a few minutes of calling and seeing nothing, I got this itch to move. I figured maybe I was in a bad spot, that the sound wasn't carrying right. I signaled to my buddy that I was going to scout a little further up the clearing, towards a thicker patch of aspens. He just gave me a thumbs up from behind his log. I started walking, my senses on high alert like they always are when you're hunting. Every little snap of a twig, every rustle, you notice it. The snow muffled my steps, but it was still work. My legs were starting to burn from the altitude. I was maybe 70, 80 yards from my friend now, coming up on the edge of the clearing where the aspens began. They were all white and slender, their leaves mostly gone, just a few yellow ones clinging on. I was scanning the tree line, looking for any movement, any patch of brown that might be an elk's hide. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't in the trees, it was in the brush, right at the tree line, a tangle of bare bushes and deadfall. At first, my brain didn't want to process it. It just registered as a shape, a dark mass that was wrong. It was huge, I mean way too big to be a bear standing up, and it was standing up, fully upright. My heart, which had been beating a steady hunter's rhythm, just dropped into my stomach. It felt like a physical falling sensation. I froze mid-step, one foot hovering over the snow. I didn't even breathe. The thing was maybe 40 yards away, half turned away from me. So I was looking at its profile and its back. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear. It was a dark, wet-looking brown, almost black in the flat grey light. The sheer size of it is what hit me first. Its shoulders were massive, rounded and powerful-looking, and they tapered down to a narrower waist. The legs were thick, like tree trunks. It must have heard me or sensed me, because it started to turn. It didn't jerk its head around like a person would. The whole upper body pivoted with a kind of heavy, deliberate motion. I still couldn't see its face clearly. It was kind of in shadow, but I got a sense of a heavy brow. And then it started to walk. It took a step into the aspens, and that's when the real terror set in. Its walk. It wasn't human. It wasn't a bear's lumbering gait either. It was this powerful, swinging walk. Its arms didn't just hang, they swung with purpose like long, heavy pendulums. The whole movement was fluid and incredibly strong. It didn't look like it was walking through the brush. It looked like the brush was just getting out of its way. There was no struggle, no rustling of branches. It just moved into the white trees, and the forest swallowed it. The whole thing, from when I first saw it to when it disappeared, couldn't have been more than 30 seconds, maybe less. But it felt like an hour. I stood there, completely frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. The cold air felt like shards of glass in my throat. I was just staring at the spot where it had been, my mind screaming one word over and over: no, no, no. After a minute, or maybe 5, I don't know, I finally managed to turn my head. I looked back towards my friend. He was still behind his log, looking in my direction, but he hadn't raised his rifle. He hadn't seen a thing. I forced my legs to move. They felt numb and clumsy, like they weren't my own. I started walking back to him, my pace quickening with every step until I was almost jogging, my breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. The snow that had seemed so peaceful before now felt like a trap, slowing me down. I got to his log and just slumped down next to him, my back against the cold wood. I was trembling all over, a fine, uncontrollable shake. "You see something?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. He was still scanning the tree line. I just shook my head, then nodded, then shook it again. I couldn't form words. I pointed a shaky finger towards the aspens. "What? An elk? A big one?" he said, his interest piqued. "No," I finally choked out. My voice was tight and thin. It wasn't an elk. "Bear." I looked at him. My face must have been white as the snow. It was walking on two legs. He squinted at me, then let out a short, dismissive laugh. It sounded obscenely loud. It was probably just a hunter, man, some big guy in a ghillie suit or something. You know how weird things look in this light? A hunter. My brain latched onto that for a second. It was a sane, logical explanation. A big hunter. In a suit. But the image of that thing, the sheer mass of it, the way it moved, that swinging, powerful gait, it flooded back and washed the logic away. "It was too big," I whispered, my eyes locked on the aspens. "Way too big." "Everything looks bigger when the adrenaline's pumping," he said, and he turned back to watch his sector. He'd already dismissed it. For him, the encounter was over. For me, it was just beginning. We sat there for another hour. I didn't call again. I didn't move. I just watched those aspens, every shift of a shadow, every time the wind made a branch sway, my heart would leap into my throat. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a physical pressure on the back of my neck. The cozy, familiar silence of the woods was gone. Now it felt like a predatory silence. Something was in there, something that had heard my call and had come to look. My mind kept replaying those 30 seconds on a loop. The dark, wet-looking hair, the width of the shoulders, the way it turned, not just its head, but its whole upper body. That walk. God, that walk. It wasn't the walk of a man trying to be quiet in the woods. It was the walk of something that belonged there, something that owned the ground it walked on. The motion was so effortless, so powerful. It haunts me to this day. We didn't see any elk. We didn't see anything else. When the sky started to get darker, signaling the end of the day, I was profoundly relieved. I'd never been so happy to leave the woods in my life. The hike back to the truck was agony. Every noise made me jump. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, my rifle held tighter than I'd ever held it before, my finger resting nervously near the trigger guard. My friend noticed. He kept making jokes about me being spooked by a hunter. I didn't have the energy to argue. How could I explain the chill of pure, undiluted terror that had gone through me? It wasn't the fear of being shot at or of a charging animal. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of seeing something that simply wasn't supposed to exist. The drive back to the little cabin we'd rented was quiet. I stared out the window at the passing forest, and for the first time in my life, it didn't feel welcoming. It felt deep and old and full of secrets. It took me years to even talk about it. I'd push the memory down, tell myself my buddy was right. It was just a trick of the light, a big hunter, my imagination. But I never really believed it. Then, a few years ago, I got on the internet. I started poking around, reading stories. I found forums where people talked about things they'd seen in the woods. And I found one about Bigfoot. I'd always thought of that as a campfire story, a joke. But I clicked on it, and I found audio files. People had recorded sounds from the woods, whoops, screams, that kind of thing. But then I found one labeled Agonized Cow Elk Call. My blood ran cold. I clicked play. The sound that came out of my computer speakers wasn't an elk. It was close, eerily close to the call I'd been using that day, but it was wrong. It had this raspy, almost screaming quality to it. It was the sound my call would make if it were in pain, or if it were a mockery of the real thing. It was a sound that promised a response you did not want. I sat there in my chair, the hairs on my arms standing up. It was like a key turning in a lock in my mind. All the pieces clicked into place. The silence after I called, the feeling of being watched, that thing appearing right where the sound had come from. I hadn't been calling an elk. I'd been using a sound that in those mountains meant something else. I hadn't attracted a bull. I had drawn in something else, something that heard my pathetic little reed and maybe thought it was a rival or a trespasser, or maybe just a curious idiot making noises in its territory. The moment of realization wasn't in the clearing. It was in my office 20-some years later, listening to that distorted, horrible sound through my computer speakers. The chill I felt was the same chill, just as deep, just as real. It left me with this weird, conflicting feeling. A part of me is still terrified. I get a tightness in my chest just thinking about it. But another part of me, another part is desperate to go back to that exact clearing, to stand there in the snow and just look, to see if the woods still feel that way, to see if I could ever get another glimpse, to prove to myself once and for all that I wasn't crazy. But I doubt I ever will. I'll probably never see it again. Some doors, once opened, you're not meant to walk through a second time. But that one day, those 30 seconds in the snowy clearing in Colorado, they're burned into me. The image of that large, dark figure, the powerful swing of its arms as it turned and walked away into the white trees, is something I will carry with me forever. It's the moment I knew, with a certainty that sank right into my bones, that the thing I was looking at was not and could never be human.